This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Today we are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free. And when Americans are sent to Vietnam or West Berlin, we do not ask for whites only. It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal service in places of public accommodation, such as hotels and restaurants and theaters and retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. But in too many communities, in too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens, and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street. I am therefore asking the Congress to enact legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in facilities which are open to the public: hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, and similar establishments. This seems to me to be an elementary right. Its denial is an arbitrary indignity that no American in 1963 should have to endure.
I shall seek within my constitutional authority to bring to speedy adoption. But in the event that the Congress shall fail to take one of these two courses, in the event that the national emergency is still critical, I shall not evade the clear course of duty that will then confront me. I shall ask the Congress for the one remaining instrument to meet the crisis: broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency as great as the power that would be given to me if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe.
We are Christian insofar as we believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe in it.
There was also a Civil Rights Commission appointed by President Eisenhower. It was the 12 resolutions recommended by this commission that would ultimately become law in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There were 6 members of this commission. It included 5 whites and 1 African American, Democrats and Republicans, 2 Southern governors, the dean of a Southern law school, a Midwestern university president, and your own Father Ted Hesburgh, president of Notre Dame.
The University of San Francisco has always held a very special place in my heart. The air, of course, is so fresh up here on the hilltop, and I can tell you that many a day I found sanctuary on this campus. Because you see, I was just out of law school, and it was here at USF that I studied for the bar exam. And unfortunately, I remember those days like they were yesterday. My friends would come up here with me to Lone Mountain and basically seek cloister, and sitting day after day at those long wooden tables on those hard-backed chairs in that dimly lit library, it felt like we were doing penance for some serious sin. And you can believe me, there was a whole lot of praying going on.
I would like to begin by reminding the viewer that the position I will be defending in this documentary is the official position of the Anglo-Saxon people in the United States arguably from the colonial period up until the Civil Rights era in the 1960s. The Virginia Assembly of 1641 stated, quote, "No Popist recusant shall at any time hereafter exercise the place or places of secretary, counselor, register, commissioner, surveyor, or sheriff, or any other public place, but be utterly disabled for the same. It shall not be lawful, under the penalty aforesaid, for any popish priest that shall hereafter arrive here to remain above 5 days." Unquote. John Locke, a primary influence upon our principal founding father, James Madison, says principally against Roman Catholicism in his letter concerning toleration, quote, "Again, that church can have no right to be tolerated by the magistrate, which is constituted upon such a bottom, that all those who enter into it do thereby ipso facto deliver themselves up to the protection and service of another prince. For by this means the magistrate would give way to the setting of a foreign jurisdiction in his own country, and suffer his own people to be listed, as it were, for soldiers against his own government." Unquote. John Adams writes to Thomas Jefferson, May 1816, quote, "I do not like the late resurrection of the Jesuits. They have a general, now in Russia, in correspondence with the Jesuits in the U.S., who are more numerous than everybody knows. Shall we not have swarms of them here? As many shapes and disguises as ever a king of the gypsies, Bamfield, Moore, Carew himself, assumed? In the shape of printers, editors, writers, schoolmasters, etc. I have lately read Pascal's letters over again, and 4 volumes of the histories of the Jesuits. If ever any congregation of men could merit eternal perdition on earth and in hell, according to these historians, though like Pascal true Catholics, it is this company of Loyola. Our system, however, of religious liberty must afford them an asylum. But if they do not put purity of our elections to a severe trial, it will be a wonder." Unquote. Enter the infamous Tammany Hall of New York City, a political organization instituted in the late 1700s for the benefit of immigrants and other minorities being taken over completely by Irish Catholics with the ever-convenient Irish potato famine in 1845. With a massive influx of Irish Catholics in the 1840s, Tammany Hall was resisted by 3 principal men: William Poole, or Bill the Butcher; Samuel Morse, the famous scientist and inventor of the telegraph and Morse code; and internationally famous political cartoonist Thomas Nast. Nast produced the most iconic political cartoons of the 19th century, mostly operating from Harper's Weekly. He focused on the Roman Catholic agenda to infiltrate the public schools in New York and their larger agenda of subverting the government of the United States. Samuel Morse ran an unsuccessful campaign for mayor in New York and also published his famous Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States, where he figured Roman Catholicism to subvert the United States government. In the Midwest, this was followed by the work of ex-Catholic priest Charles Chiniquy in Urbana, Illinois, and his conflict with his previous church. He was defended by one Abraham Lincoln, who became a good friend of his. He blamed the assassination of Lincoln on the Catholic Church. The assassins, John Wilkes Booth and Mary Surratt, were indeed radical Roman Catholics. Chiniquy's campaign against the Roman Church was canonized in his famous book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome. He was succeeded in Chicago by fellow ex-Catholic priest Jeremiah Crowley. His work is canonized in his Romanism, A Menace to the Nation, and his The Pope, Chief of White Slavers and High Priest of Intrigue. In response to the infamous movie The Birth of a Nation, 1915, the second and most famous iteration of the Ku Klux Klan was founded on Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1915. By the mid-1920s, the group had grown in the millions all over the country as a response to the massive influx of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe. Indiana became a bastion of the Klan, and in May of 1924, the Klan provoked a showdown with the Roman Catholic Church with their march on the University of Notre Dame. So prevalent was the focus on anti-Catholicism that the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 was passed in order to preserve America as an ethnically British and Northern European Protestant nation, at least ethnically and demographically. This piece of legislation was the exact target of the Civil Rights era in 1964 and 1965. Enter the first Roman Catholic president of the United States, John F. Kennedy.
I hope that every American, regardless of where he lives, will stop and examine his conscience about this and other related incidents. This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Today we are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free. And when Americans are sent to Vietnam or West Berlin, we do not ask for whites only. It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal service in places of public accommodation, such as hotels and restaurants and theaters and retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. And it ought to be possible for American citizens of any color to register and to vote in a free election without interference or fear of reprisal. It ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being American without regard to his race or his color. In short, every American ought to have the right to be treated as he would wish to be treated, as one would wish his children to be treated. But this is not the case. The old code of equity law under which we live commands for every wrong a remedy. But in too many communities, in too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street. I am therefore asking the Congress to enact legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in facilities which are open to the public: hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, and similar establishments. This seems to me to be an elementary right. Its denial is an arbitrary indignity that no American in 1963 should have to endure. In this respect, I want to pay tribute to those citizens north and south who've been working in their communities to make life better for all. They are acting not out of a sense of legal duty, but out of a sense of human decency. Like our soldiers and sailors in all parts of the world, they are meeting freedom's challenge on the firing line, and I salute them for their honor and their courage. My fellow Americans, this is a problem which faces us all, in every city of the North as well as the South. Today, there are Negroes unemployed 2 or 3 times as many compared to whites. Inadequate education, moving into the large cities, unable to find work, young people particularly out of work, without hope, denied equal rights, denied the opportunity to eat at a restaurant or a lunch counter or go to a movie theater, denied the right to a decent education, denied almost today the right to attend a state university even though qualified. It seems to me that these are matters which concern us all, not merely presidents or congressmen or governors, but every citizen of the United States. This is one country. It has become one country because all of us and all the people who came here had an equal chance to develop their talents. We cannot say to 10% of the population that you can't have that right, that your children can't have the chance to develop whatever talents they have, that the only way that they are going to get their rights is to go in the street and demonstrate. I think we owe them and we owe ourselves a better country than that. Therefore, I'm asking for your help in making it easier for us to move ahead and to provide the kind of equality of treatment which we would want ourselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Protestant conspiracy theorists were right in their predictions. Mr. Kennedy's civil rights legislation was passed, and in 1965, after the alleged assassination of JFK, his brothers Teddy Kennedy and Robert Kennedy championed the Immigration Act of 1965, which has since destroyed this country. The other major player was Notre Dame celebrity Father Ted Hesburgh, and I find it disgusting that the man who formally introduced the bill, Emanuel Seller, a Jew, was also the man who repaired diplomatic relations between the United States and the papacy, with his letter to U.S. Secretary of State Cordell Hull. This Jew was obviously a servant of Rome, as most elite Jews are today, and have been since they betrayed the Lord Jesus Christ, saying, "We have no king but Caesar." Martin Luther King Jr. was mentored by a man named A. Philip Randolph. Randolph, of course, also being a member of the Jesuit-created Methodist Church. Randolph's mentor was a Jesuit priest by the name of John LaFarge Jr., who in effect was the actual father of the civil rights era. Martin Luther King was also championed by Pope Pius VI. John LaFarge was the actual father of the civil rights era. His books, Interracial Justice, A Study of the Catholic Doctrine of Race Relations, 1937, and Race Relations 1956 were the actual foundation of this legislation. The crusade was accomplished, and the once great Protestant of the United States was now officially ruled by Rome. This legislation is coupled with the previous FDR emergency powers legislation, where he is surrounded by Roman Catholic Knights of Columbus with the feathers of their chapeau prevalent in the background. In this documentary, I will be responding to the documentary Occupied by Stu Peters. Thus, I believe it is fair and honest to say, given the proceeding, that Stu Peters' alt-right neo-Nazi position is treason against the Anglo-Saxon people of the United States. He is deliberately hiding the crimes of the Roman Catholic Church by blaming our current predicament on the Jewish people. And I will therefore declare him and everyone who agrees with him a traitor to the people of the United States. In mid-2017, I produced my database, The Ultimate Guide Against Neo-Nazis and the Alt-Right, which is the most comprehensive database ever assembled, exposing the lie that Jews control the world. In August of 2017, I produced this video, The Alt-Right is a Deep State Catholic Psyop. The video predicted that the then alt-right movement would be usurped by Roman Catholics, focusing on a Jewish antagonist in the West.
The alt-right is a deep state Catholic psyop. In light of recent events in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the inflamed American population regarding racial controversies in America, and the rise of the alt-right, I now feel obliged to expose the organization I believe to be responsible for the civil war erupting in the United States of America. I maintain that the Jesuit order of the Roman Catholic Church and its subservience and traditional Catholic knighthoods have created both the degenerate social justice movement and the alt-right movement as backlashes against social problems created by the said Jesuits themselves in order to justify martial law and eliminate their religious and political enemies in the United States. Archbishop John Ireland suggested in 1892 of using the Indians, the blacks, in the public schools against their Protestant enemies to take over the United States. We read in The Devil in the Church, page 358, quote, Archbishop Ireland, in a speech at Rome 1892, said, quote, "We can have the United States in 10 years, and I want to give you 3 points for your consideration. The Indians, the Negroes, and the public schools," unquote. And thus the origins of the social justice movement in the United States Department of Education. The Jesuits are famous for their emphasis on social justice and racial liberation theology. Here we can also see the USA Today article on the Jesuit order, education, and social justice emphasis. One could even see today that the dominant liberation theology taught in liberal seminaries comes from Gustavo Gutierrez, a Jesuit-trained Dominican monk. His Jesuit instructor was a Frenchman named Henry de Labac. Moreover, the Immigration Act of 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act, was intended to preserve the British Protestant identity of our country. The U.S. Department of State admits, quote, as a result, the percentage of visas available to individuals from the British Isles and Western Europe increased, but newer immigration from other areas like Southern and Eastern Europe was limited, unquote. This was to limit Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox people from coming here. But you guessed it, the 1965 Civil Rights Act abolished these protections. You see, the Civil Rights Act was pro-Catholic. Oh, I know that, you neo-Nazi boys, that makes you so mad to hear that. That 1965 Civil Rights Act was pro-Catholic, pro-neo-Nazi. That hurts. Ooh, it hurts so bad to hear the truth. Immigration policy in the United States, February 2006, by the Congress of the United States states, quote, during World War I, immigration levels were relatively low. However, when mass immigration resumed after the war, quantitative restrictions were introduced. The Congress established a new immigration policy, a national origins quota system enacted as part of the quota law in 1921 and revised in 1924. That's the Johnson-Reed Act. Continuing, the Immigration and Nationality Act amendments of 1965 abolished the national origins quota system, unquote. There it is, the liberal Jews and the civil rights liberals working for the benefit of the neo-Nazi Catholics. Bring all these Catholics over here, just like the Nazis won, with Operation Paperclip. So who was behind the civil rights movement in America? None other than Jesuit John Lafarge Jr., who was the mentor of A. Philip Randolph, the father of the civil rights era, and Catholic priest Theodore Hesborough, influential member of the United States Civil Rights Commission, working for the genocide of the original Anglo and Celtic Protestant population.
After all, I stand here today as president and as an African American on the 55th anniversary of the day that the Supreme Court handed down the decision in Brown versus Board of Education. Now, Brown was, of course, the first major step in dismantling the separate but equal doctrine. But it would take a number of years and a nationwide movement to fully realize the dream of civil rights for all of God's children. There were freedom rides, and lunch counters, and billy clubs. There was also a Civil Rights Commission appointed by President Eisenhower. It was the 12 resolutions recommended by this commission that would ultimately become law in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. There were 6 members of this commission. It included 5 whites and 1 African American, Democrats and Republicans, 2 Southern governors, the dean of a Southern law school, a Midwestern university president, and your own Ted Hesborough, president. So they worked for 2 years. And at times, President Eisenhower had to intervene personally since no hotel or restaurant in the South would serve the black and white members of the commission together. And finally, when they reached an impasse in Louisiana, Father Ted flew them all to Notre Dame's retreat in Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin, where they eventually overcame their differences and hammered out a final deal. And years later, President Eisenhower asked Father Ted how on earth he was able to broker an agreement between men of such different backgrounds and beliefs. And Father Ted simply said that during their first dinner in Wisconsin, they discovered they were all fishermen. And so he quickly rented a boat for a twilight trip out on the lake. They fished, and they talked, and they changed the course of history. I will not pretend that the challenges we face will be easy, or that the answers will come quickly, or that all our differences and divisions will fade happily away. Because life is not that simple. It never has been. But as you leave here today, remember the lessons of Cardinal Bernardine, of Father Hesborough,
Some very shocking documents that I saw at the Library of Congress 2 weeks ago on August 10th. On August 9th, had to do with the hearings of the McCormick-Dickstein Committee of November 1934. Show that Prescott Bush and the DuPont family, the Remington family, and J.P. Morgan tried to overthrow the U.S. government, assassinate FDR, and put a Hitler-style fascist state in place. I have in my possession testimony from the McCormick-Dickstein Committee in November of 1934 by one of the fascist plotters that they were going to follow Hitler's model exactly and impose martial law on the United States, round up unemployed people that were worthless to the economy and troublemakers and Jews and put them into internment camps. And their plan was, if necessary, to exterminate the people that could not be part of the effort. The only reason the coup attempt in 1934 didn't succeed is that they hired the wrong general to lead it, General Smedley Butler, the great Marine hero, two-time Congressional Medal of Honor winner, who worked with the plotters just long enough to be able to identify who they were and then blew the whistle on them to Congress. Incredibly, after being warned by the FBI and the Justice Department and the Treasury Department to cease and desist in their Nazi dealings, they had continued them until 1951. There had been 28 additional seizures of Nazi assets and Nazi business fronts between late 1942 and 1951, and that they had moved Nazi assets into Switzerland, Brazil, Argentina, and Panama, and they had continued to do business with their primary Nazi patron, who was Fritz Thyssen, who backed Hitler beginning in 1921 and who was the wealthiest man in Germany, and a steel and coal baron who, with his partner Friedrich Flick, essentially built the Nazi war machine along with I.G. Farben. In 1951, when Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina, Union Banking Corporation was liquidated by the U.S. government, and Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his holdings in his Nazi business, and that was the beginning of the Bush family fortune for all intents and purposes.
To pour on the humiliating evidence even higher, the evidence the Nazis and the Catholic Church were the closest of Confederates is as follows. Number one, the Third Reich was the open continuation of the Holy Roman Empire. Number two, Franz von Papen declared on January 14, 1934, the Third Reich is the first power which not only recognizes, but puts into practice the high principles of the papacy. Number three, the Rights Concordat. We see a formal connection between the Nazi government and the Vatican. Number four, speaking of the Night of the Long Knives, we read in The Night of the Long Knives by Paul R. Marison, page 193, quote, Otto Strasser labeled it the German Saint Bartholomew. Number five, Hitler's Operation Barbarossa. Why did he name that invasion after a Catholic medieval Roman emperor if he was not operating under the auspices of Catholic influence? Number six, when the Ustase, puppets of the Nazis, came into power, led by Ante Pavelic, in Croatia, all non-Catholics were either exterminated or forcefully converted to Catholicism. See the Glina massacres. The Informaciones, a Spanish publication, wrote in 1945, we read, quote, Adolf Hitler, son of the Catholic Church, has died defending Christianity, unquote. Number 8, Frauenkirch, Nuremberg, where Hitler continued to glory in the Catholic Church, as we see from this most dramatic image. Number 9, Hitler referred to Himmler as, quote, my Ignatius of Loyola. Number 10, Joseph Mengele, the Nazi angel of death, was a Catholic. Holocaust Politics by Professor John Roth, page 108, states, quote, despite rebelling against his strict religious upbringing, Mengele identified himself as a Catholic, unquote. Number 11, Roman Catholic priest Joseph Sitso, as recorded in The Vatican Against Europe by Edmund Paris, page 157, quote, Catholicism and Nazism, he says, have much in common, and they work hand in hand to reform the world, unquote. Moreover, A simple examination of the Fourth Lateran Council, especially Canon number 68, reveals how eerily similar Hitler's Nazi regime was to traditional and formal Catholic canon law.
Enter the Council for National Policy in 1981. Seminal Catholics and members of the Knights of Malta in this organization are as follows. Paul Weyrich. We see here in the U.S. News article concerning Paul Weyrich, God and Country, How Paul Weyrich Founded the Christian Right. By Dan Gilgoff, God and Country, who's the person most responsible for bringing evangelicals who had retreated from public life in America after the public relations disaster of 1925 Scopes monkey trial back into politics? Here's a hint. He co-founded the Moral Majority. No, it isn't Jerry Falwell. It's Paul Weyrich, the powerful but low-profile conservative activist who died this morning. Weyrich was the behind-the-scenes architect of Falwell's very public organization, which began a legacy of evangelical political activism that has since been taken up by the likes of the Christian Coalition and Focus on the Family. Continuing, but Weyrich, who founded the Heritage Foundation earlier in that decade, knew he needed a figure who could tap into the masses of theologically conservative evangelicals and fundamentalists across the country. Weyrich himself couldn't do it. He'd been raised a Roman Catholic and had since joined the Orthodox Eastern Catholic Church. And he wasn't a preacher. But Weyrich had recently been introduced to a Virginia preacher who hosted a popular weekly TV show, who founded a Bible college. His name was Jerry Falwell. Right? And then we see the collaboration between Baptists in America and this Roman Catholic coup that has been developing in this country. Okay? And you go to churches and organizations affiliated with the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary up in Louisville, Kentucky, where I used to live. Go to some of the big churches like Clifton Baptist Church, and you will see the front row parking lot of their church. Every car that I saw in the front row on the left side of their church had a Freemasonic emblems on the back of their vehicles. The Southern Baptist Convention is loaded with Masonic knighthoods. Right? Because who are they serving? They're serving the Catholic Church. They're serving the Pope of Rome, the Jesuit papacy, the Antichrist and man of sin, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Enter J. Peter Grace. We read in Covert Action Information Bulletin number 25, page 28, footnote number 1. Grace has also served as the chairman of the Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty Fund, a CIA front infested with Nazi collaborators, and of the American Institute for Free Labor Development, another CIA-funded organization. The chairman of the W.R. Grace Executive Committee, Felix Larkin, is also a SMOM, that is a Knights of Malta organization. The Chancellor of the Order, John D.J. Moore, was the director of the Grace Company until at least 1982, having been with the company since 1946, managing its Peruvian operators from 1947-1950. From 1969 to 1975, Moore was with the U.S. Ambassador to Ireland. Thus, we see the deep state connection with the Council for National Policy, the Knights of Malta, J. Peter Grace, and the so-called moral majority, the right-wing backlash, so-called here in America. This is all governed by the Roman papacy, folks, and their knighthood organizations. Thomas A. Bolan was also high-ranking Roman Catholic, involved seemingly with the Council for National Policy. Enter Frank Shakespeare, Roman Catholic, Jesuit-trained, ambassador to the Vatican under Ronald Reagan. What these men have done here is, through Operation Paperclip, import a foreign European paradigm narrative and conflict, namely the traditional Catholicism versus Jewish Bolshevikism, to predominate over the already existing racial conflicts with the whites, natives, and Africans here in North America. And it need not be emphasized how effective they have been. At this moment, they have gained supreme power in America. As already pointed out, Trump is Jesuit-trained at Fordham. His family has close connections with Jesuit Georgetown University, but also his close advisors, Catholic Kelly N. Conway and Stephen Bannon, Catholic and Jesuit-trained as Mr. Bannon, are members of the Council for National Policy. Enter Richard Spencer, the National Policy Institute. The National Policy Institute, quote, is an independent organization dedicated to the heritage, identity, and future of people of European descent in the United States and around the world. It was founded in 2005 by William Regnery II and Samuel T. Francis in conjunction with Lewis R. Andrews. William Regnery II's grandfather created a publishing house, Regnery Publishing, with serious deep state and Nazi collaboration. We read in The Nazi Hydra in America, Suppressed History of a Century by Glenn Yeadon, quotation, William Regnery was also one of the founders of the American Security Council. His son Henry later replaced him. The American Security Council had a great influence on the Reagan administration and on many of the more hotly debated issues of the 1950s through the 1980s. Regnery and two other isolationists began broadcasting Human Events and in 1947 started Regnery Publishing. Interestingly enough, the first two titles published by Regnery were critical of the Nuremberg trials. The third was another pro-Nazi book attacking the Allied air campaign. In 1954, Regnery published two books for the John Birch Society. He also was publisher of William F. Buckley Jr.'s God and Man at Yale. According to Howard Hunt, the CIA subsidized Regnery Publishing because of its pro-Nazi stance. Deep State. Regnery also created the pro-Catholic Charles Martel Society. The chief publication of this society is the Occidental Quarterly, with chief editor Kevin B. McDonald, who was raised Roman Catholic. Samuel T. Francis was protege to famous Jesuit-trained Catholic Pat Buchanan. As for Andrews, his Jesuitical techniques were on display as he admitted he voted for Barack Obama specifically to hurt the current conservative movement. Quotation. Andrews said he voted for Obama because, quote, I want to see the Republican Party destroyed so it can be reborn as a party representing the interests of white people and not entrenched corporate elites, unquote. This is exactly how I view the past century of Catholic intrigue in this country. These men are shrewd atheists who do not believe that truth shall set us free. They don't believe in truth. They are nihilists who view the Catholic religion as a way to keep their country under their control. So what do? They help liberals and atheists and Jews come to power so that the liberals will destroy the country and provide the Catholics an opportunity to blame the Protestants for the problems in this country. You think I'm exaggerating that, don't you, listener? I'm not. That's exactly what they're doing. They're saying, and I'm going to show you direct quotations from boys in the alt-right, from leaders and big speakers in the alt-right, saying that exact thing, that the Protestant Reformation is to blame for all of this liberalism and immorality and degeneracy. And now to Richard Spencer.
I think in the United States was defined by Anglo-Protestants, certainly at the beginning. But particularly after the Civil War, it was defined by this big European family.
Spencer tells us that America was originally Anglo-Protestant, but after the Civil War adopted a pan-European policy. What he doesn't tell us is that the Anglo-Protestants rejected this move and protested the immigration of Irish and Italian Catholics and solidified this rejection of pan-Europeanism in the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 already cited. Spencer's and the alt-right's pan-Europeanism is nothing but a racial leverage point to reintroduce the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic religion. I bet you think I'm exaggerating, don't you? I bet you think I am overstating my case in a fit of emotion, don't you? Okay?
I also have big dreams. Reviving the Roman Empire, it would be an empire that would be welcome to Italians, to Scots, to Russians, to white Americans, to Finns, etc.
We need long-term leadership. We need to think in terms of long-term leadership. We need an aristocracy, which we have lost. In America, I don't know that we ever had much of one. But we need something like the Roman Catholic Church's College of Cardinals.
The question for us is, can the race problem be solved through the political system? And at the risk of sounding pedantic, I would say that theoretically most anything could be created through the political system. Theoretically, we could end democracy and install a Catholic monarchy, install a Catholic monarchy, install a Catholic monarchy.
Ramsey Paul lies about the Reformation and says nothing about Calvinists and the Solemn League and Covenant, which was a pro-constitutional monarchist movement, and blames all modern liberalism on the Protestant Reformation.
So a little background on me, just so you know. I'm a Protestant. I was raised as a Protestant. Let me see. My mother was a Protestant, and then my parents were divorced, and she married a Jewish guy, so I'm familiar with the Jewish. And my stepmother was a really strong Catholic. And my dad, he became like a Druid. He kind of became. He said he was a Reformed Druid. It was a weird mix-up. So I'm not against any religion. This isn't anti-religion. So don't throw your rolls at me. You guys ate all your rolls. So anyway, the whole idea was. Martin Luther was, I consider him in some ways, the first progressive. He was a Catholic monk and a Catholic priest. And I'm not against Catholics, okay? In fact, I think they're kind of cool. And my brother, have you guys watched my brother's video? He's a lot more popular than I am. He's like one of the famous woodworker, Mir Myrtles. He's a great guy. He was trained in filmmaking, and so we were thinking, we like Catholics, so we're going to do maybe a, you guys ever see The Exorcist? Who saw The Exorcist? Yeah, so we're going to do kind of like the opposite of an exorcist, right? So that where the devil cast out the priest from the young boy. So that was going to be our... All right, the SPLC guy writes, okay, anti-Catholic and anti-homo. So yeah. No, I'm just joking. So, okay. But he thought that the church should not be a hierarchy of clergy, but a community of believers. See, for Western civilization, for really 1,000 years, it was, God, the church, the people. And he was the first one to think, no, we don't need to go through the priest to get to God. We can go directly through the scripture or directly to Jesus and all that. We don't need the priest. So this was like the egalitarianism spiritually. And this really kicked off a lot of things that happened in Europe and so forth, that all Christians are part of the holy priesthood. This was the first guy. And then you had the Puritans. And, when I think of the Puritans, what do you think of? You think... Yeah, I think of Thanksgiving, right? The Puritan Thanksgiving, and which is interesting. And I asked my Jewish stepfather, he's not alive anymore, but I asked, do you Jews, do you celebrate Thanksgiving? And he says, no, we're Jews, so we just celebrate thanks. All right. Yeah, the SPLC guy, okay, Jew joke down there. That was actually that guy's joke, so don't blame me, okay? Anyway, the Puritans were opposed to the monarchy, and they really gained influence in the University of Cambridge. And the Pilgrims, remember, they migrated to New England because they were kind of like the hippies of the day. They just wanted their own thing, do their own way, and they came to the New World. And they were really kind of the radical progressives of the day. I know it's funny to think of that, but that's the way it was. And then there's this guy. That's good. I didn't know we had that many neo-reactionaries. Oliver Cromwell, he was a self-styled Puritan Moses. I mean, who does that? But this guy did. And do you guys, who watched Games of Thrones? I know you guys are probably moral, so you don't do that like me. But yeah, he was like the original Kingslayer. I'm not saying he has sex with his sister, but he killed King Charles. Most people don't understand. You had to watch Game of Thrones to understand that one. And he ruled England. But this was the first time because they had the egalitarian concept, get rid of the monarchy. That was Oliver Cromwell.
Martin Luther was not against an authoritarian church office. And the Puritans were not against the monarchy. They were against the Stuarts. The Solemn League and Covenant preserved the monarchy. And finally, Millennial Woes comes flat out with his nihilism, his support of the Catholic Church, and his hatred of the Protestant Reformation.
What religion do you profess? Traditional Catholicism, Orthodox Christianity, Protestantism, Reformed Christianity, agnosticism or atheism, paganism, esoteric nationalism, or other. Well, this is annoying because if the question were, which religion do you favour or most support, then it would be traditional Catholicism. Orthodox Christianity. But as for which one I profess, it has to be agnosticism/atheism. Regretfully. So, there we go. should the state protect the religion which most reflects our contemporary pause culture? Surely not. But, if we're going to go by that rule, the state must protect the religion which most reflects the culture, then that is what it would be some sort of awful cucked Protestantism. Cucked Protestantism. Okay, the state must protect the religion which most unites the white race. Okay, the next one. Which economic system is best? Capitalism, socialism, syndicalism, distributism, communalism. I think distributism.
Here, Millennial Woes flatly admits he is an atheist who supports the Church of Rome, just like the vast majority of Roman Catholic men.
Sure enough, within a year, especially after the Charlottesville event, the racialist Nazi element and the neo-pagan element were usurped by the Catholic Church and its deep state, installing Roman Catholics Nick Fuentes and E. Michael Jones as the new heads of the alt-right movement.
Somebody outside a protester was asking about the term culture war. It's got a long history, started late 1800s, Otto von Bismarck, Culture Kampf. In the late 1990s, mid-1990s, it was reclaimed by conservatives, one of those being E. Michael Jones, who actually started this magazine, Culture Wars magazine, and because of his fantastic work, we now understand... Thank you. Give it up. Because of E. Michael Jones' groundbreaking work, we now understand that sexual liberation is political control. It's a form of political control. And you have multiple times advocated on behalf of accepting homosexuality, accepting homosexual acts as normative in the conservative movement. How does anal sex help us win the culture war?
I'm going to let the gay man answer. Wait a minute. So can I ask you a question? Can you have the balls to ask the gay man on the stage that question and don't defer to him?
The furthest leftist on a college campus. Right? It doesn't happen that way. We're willing to listen.
This is so good, dude. This is better. This is better than questions.
I would also refer the viewer to Chris Pinto's excellent documentary, American Jesuits, A History of Jesuitism in the United States, for a similar Protestant gloss on American history. The YouTube channel Rome Rules and his Reddit forum, Veritas Equitas, is suggested. Also, the Reddit forum Hibiki Black and the Odyssey channel Giovanni Johnny Cerrucci is also suggested for more information. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas allegedly attacked Israel, killing 1,180 Israelis, including civilians. The elite and the mainstream media responded by producing false flag attacks on Gaza, where we see Israel supposedly bombing Gaza, where the buildings are clearly controlled demolition. Here we see mainstream liberal news publications doing false flag events, demonizing the Jews to the benefit of the Catholic alt-right. Let that sink in. We have been told for decades that the Jews control the media by the so-called patriot and alt-right movements in this country. These are clearly false flag controlled demolitions. Those are not, I repeat, not authentic Israeli attacks on Gaza. Yet Stu Peters and the alt-right want you to believe that the liberal mainstream media is giving you hard facts, while they tell us on the other side of their mouths that the Jews control the media. I posted to my subscribers on Discord on October 9th, quote, "My position on the current Israel-Palestine war. I believe that this is a stage of the Gog and Magog prophecy of the Baptist Church, which also happens to be my Dreyfus affair. This event is a trigger to begin an alliance of the anti-Western powers, especially Islamic and Chinese, with a purpose to invade Israel and the United States. Traditional Christian men and traditional Muslim men are key to be exterminated. This war will lead to the physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion of the world, and bring traditional Christianity and Islam to its knees. Text, liturgy, and hierarchy will be fingered as the cause of this great cataclysm, and the world will welcome Joachim's prophecy being fulfilled. The Christian Gnostics and the Sufis are key to arise from this cataclysm as the inheritors of the earth with their perennial philosophy. Of course, as my subscribers know, Baptist eschatology was created by the Jesuits Emmanuel Lacunza and Francisco Ribera. This false flag event was the catalyst for an international backlash against the Jewish people. Protests against Israel broke out in campuses all over the United States, in UCLA, USC, Columbia, and many other universities. Elon Musk took over Twitter and has now made it the top anti-Semitic platform in the world. I am on X on a regular, and it is flooded with anti-Jewish sentiment. The anti-Semitism got so bad that in May of 2024, the Congress passed H.R. 6090 Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Thus, my Protestant view of history has been fully vindicated, and my predicted Jesuit futurist Gog and Magog theater is falling out day by day. Now, before I begin my refutation of Peters, I would like to give my gloss of the Jewish people, as to not come across as a bootlicker for Netanyahu. The Jewish people are indeed the most ruthless, tribal group of people in the world. They hate God, they worship only their bloodline, they hate Yeshua Messiah, and they hate the majority of the human race. And for this reason, traditional Protestant nations have excluded them from their countries, and I would sympathize with this position. Many of them have served the Roman papacy's agenda in corrupting Protestant nations, such as our own. And for these crimes, the guilty should be prosecuted. I believe the Jews en masse should be settled in their ancient homeland in Israel, apart from us. This is the traditional Protestant position, and thus my true Scotsman is defined and clearly presented. Enter now Stu Peters and his viral documentary, Occupy. Stu Peters is most likely just another grifter who's being fed information from the deep state. He is a well-known follower of the QAnon platform, which began overtly claiming to be a deep state agent trying to reveal the truth about the alleged Jewish-led satanic pedophile ring. This platform is straight out of the Catholic medieval period, when the Catholic Church used blood libels against the Jews to foment unrest against them. And isn't it fascinating, ladies and gentlemen, how the papists have been so effective of making the liberal platform sound like the Protestant platform? This psyop was canonized in the famous statue of Simon of Trent. All in all, Peters and his entire crew, with the exception of Cynthia McKinney, have no published books relevant to the topic, or any degrees to make them competent in their assertions. Peters is joined by Dan Bilzerian, a professional poker player. Kenneth O'Keefe is an ex-Marine who appears to be a member of a Catholic knighthood or brotherhood from the emblem he wears on his chest, which is the cross of the Knights of Malta with a Nazi symbol in the middle, wreathed in the Jesuit sunburst theme from their logo. It appears to be the cross of honor of the German mothers, as you can see a full version here. Peters is also joined by Arthur Cohn Lee, a professional painter. Cynthia McKinney, former member of the United States House of Representatives, who actually has authored a few books, also joins Peters in his documentary. Sam Parker, an America First failed political candidate in Utah, is also represented. Also, we have Jeff Berwick, an entrepreneur and an ANCAP activist. And of course, we have Candace Owens, an incompetent professional grifter and visceral divester.
Sprinkle, sprinkle.
Other than McKinney, this documentary is obviously a grift to sell edgy opinions. Cynthia McKinney seems to be the only one who has given this matter any serious scholarly consideration and has actually written relevant books to the matter. But this documentary has been viewed millions of times and needs an updated refutation, though this position has received refutation from this platform multiple times over the past 10 years. Before I begin the full refutation, I would simply put these few points before the viewer to preemptively bust the proverbial lip of my opponents as to shock them out of incredulous lethargy. Number 1. Modern banking was built by the Catholic Knights Templars, not the Jews. Number 2. Usury was made legal in the West, first by Pope Leo X, Fifth Lateran Council, Session 10, May 4th, 1515. Number 3. The modern Catholic Church was subverted not by the Jews, but by Jesuits Teilhard de Jardin and John Courtney Murray, with his doctrinal warfare campaign and his control of the CIA, as demonstrated by David Winhoff in his John Courtney Murray, Time Life, and the American Proposition. This was a final subversion, but was began many centuries ago with Joachim Fiore and Meister Eckhart. Number 4. Critical theory, the Frankfurt School, and social constructivism are rooted in Catholic theology, the doctrine of God's transcendence, and its accompanying epistemic position of analogy and proportionality, and the monk Joachim Fiore's 3H prophecy of the end of text liturgy and hierarchy. Christians believe that since God is transcendent, human language is a barrier between the believer and God. Theosis and true union with God requires an end to human language and consciousness according to Christian theology. This is the heart of the critical theory and the Frankfurt School's attack on ideology. Number 5. The Civil Rights era and the Immigration Act were the products of the high Irish Catholic Kennedy family. Emanuel Seller, the court Jew the 1488ers love to use as a deflection here, is the man who repaired diplomatic relations between the United States and the Vatican. Seller was obviously then a servant of Rome, not of Israel. Number 6. Jesuit priest Father Peter Jean Bex was the man who trained Karl Marx in his communism, not a Jew. If you see the interview with Karl Marx, Chicago Tribune, January 5th, 1879. This was a product of the Jesuit reductions in South America, where the economic system of communism was perfected in the century before Marx. Number 7. The Masonic Lodge's Brotherhood of Man doctrine meant white men, not all men. See Thomas Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia, pages 144 to 150. Benjamin Franklin, Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind, 1751. Views of General Albert Pike, Alexandria, Virginia, September 13, 1875. Prince Hall Freemasonry was created specifically because blacks were not allowed in the traditional Masonic lodges. Thus, traditional Freemasonry cannot run the modern New World Order and our post-racial society. Number 8. The germ theory of disease was invented by Jesuit priest Athanasius Kircher, and the first vaccine campaigns took place in South America under Carmelite and Jesuit Catholic missionaries, beginning in 1728 during smallpox outbreaks. A Jesuit-trained Catholic Spanish doctor named José Ignacio Bartoloche was the leading proponent of vaccine campaigns in the late 1700s in South America. Number 9. The mass media and Hollywood are clearly controlled by the CIA and the Pentagon, while Jews are clearly in the position of servant managers for this industry. Wild Bill Donovan, the creator of the CIA, received a Catholic knighthood from Pope Pius XII, and the CIA was clearly under Catholic Jesuit control by the time of John Courtney Murray and his doctrinal warfare campaign. The lawsuit of Adam Sarolsky against the CIA clearly demonstrated the CIA is anti-Jewish, not pro-Jewish. CIA polygraph administrator Charles B. referred to Sarolsky as, and I quote, that little Jew bastard, unquote. Number 10. The chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank is a Gentile, Jesuit-trained Roman Catholic named Jerome Powell. Number 11. Ever since the debate between Michael Collins Piper and Eric John Phelps, the 1488ers have based their position on the fact that if the Catholic Church ruled the United States, we would not have Roe v. Wade. Yet, Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022. Number 12. Hitler was funded by Wall Street. This was exposed by Congressman Louis T. McFadden's speech, June 10, 1932, before the House of Representatives. Now, the 1488ers tell us that the Jews control the financial institutions. So, wait, the Jews funded their own genocide campaign? 13. Far from the Soviet regime being Jewish, Stalin intended to massacre the Jews. We read in the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, page 92, quote, "During the last years of Stalin's life, a wave of Jews became noticeable. From 1950 on, they were hauled in little by little as cosmopolites. And that was why the doctor's case was cooked up. It would appear that Stalin intended to arrange a great massacre of the Jews," unquote. Moreover, the Soviet Union had its own version of the Dreyfus Affair, with the famous doctor's plot, wherein Russian Jewish doctors were accused of trying to poison Soviet leadership. They were tortured for it, but later released. 14. George Soros is hated by the nation of Israel. You can see the Jerusalem Post, Our World, Soros' Campaign of Global Chaos by Carolyn Glick, August 22, 2016. The Jews in Israel want Israel to be a Jewish homeland for Jewish people, a Jewish ethno-state. George Soros wants Israel to be a typical, multicultural, globo-homo melting pot like most mega-moguls advocate for. George Soros is advocating for the exact opposite interests that Stu Peters and the 1488ers would have you believe. Number 15. Concerning the Holocaust. We read Hitler's words in Das Schwarzkorps, SS newspaper, November 24, 1938, quote, "The result will be the certain and absolute end of Jewry in Germany. Its complete annihilation," unquote. Hitler's conversation with Joseph Hell, 1922, quote, "If I am ever really in power, the destruction of the Jews will be my first and most important job. As soon as I have power, I shall have gallows after gallows erected, for example in Munich, on the Marienplatz, as many of them as traffic allows. The Jews will be hanged one after another, and they will stay hanging until they sink. They will stay hanging as long as hygienically possible. As soon as they are untied, then the next group will follow, and that will continue until the last Jew in Munich is exterminated. Exactly the same procedure will be followed in other cities until Germany is cleansed of the last Jew," unquote. And again, if indeed there was no program to exterminate the Jews in Germany, as the 1488ers would have us believe, then why is it that Hitler would have to be bribed to allow 1,600 Jews to leave Germany on the Kastner train? The reason why? There was indeed a program of the extermination of the Jewish people in Germany to the visceral obstinacy of the 1488ers. These 15 points are my primary refutation of the 1488er position and Stu Peters' documentary, and I simply cannot see how any, even moderately honest person can still hold the 1488er position after allowing these facts to enter their conscience. But now we will go line by line through Peter's documentary.
As Christians in a Christian country, we have a right to be, at minimum, agnostic about the leadership being all Jewishly occupied.
I would like to present Peter's an alternative collage. Kamala Harris, Gentile, Vice President of the Senate, Vice President of the United States, Jesuit trained at the University of San Francisco. Jerome Powell, Gentile, Chair of the Federal Reserve, Roman Catholic, Jesuit trained at Georgetown University. Joe Biden, Gentile, Irish Roman Catholic, President of the United States. President Donald Trump, elect, Gentile, Jesuit trained at Fordham. Bill Burns, Gentile, head of the CIA, Roman Catholic, trained at multiple Catholic schools, one in Oxford, devoted to the Counter-Reformation. John Roberts, Gentile, head of the U.S. Supreme Court, Roman Catholic. And of course, the legislation which has preceded us, which completely dominates our country, John F. Kennedy's Civil Rights era, Gentile, Irish Roman Catholic, and Viet D. Dinh, a Vietnamese Roman Catholic, author of the Patriot Act, two of the greatest pieces of legislation in our lifetime. And again, all of these are Roman Catholic, predominantly Jesuit and Counter-Reformation trained. Moreover, we see that the largest religious affiliation in Congress is Roman Catholic, followed by their creation, their spawn, the Baptists and the Methodists, both churches being creations of the Jesuits, as I have demonstrated dozens of times.
We should be at war with fucking Israel 100 times over, and instead we're just sending them money, and it's fucking craziness.
Look at the state of Israel, look at the state of Tel Aviv, and look at the state of Philadelphia. You tell me where this money's going. You tell me who's benefiting from this.
This is absolutely precious. One of the main reasons we lost our gold standard here in America and had our dollar greatly depreciated over the past 60 years is because our government gave our gold to the German Nazi regime. Again, from the speech of Louis T. McFadden, recorded in the Federal Reserve Bank by H.S. Keenan, quote, "Immense sums belonging to our national bank depositors have been given to Germany on no collateral security whatever. The Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks have issued United States currency on mere finance drafts drawn by Germans. Billions upon billions of our money," and remember, he's talking in 1932, "has been pumped into Germany, and money is still being pumped into Germany by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. Her worthless paper is still being negotiated here and renewed here on the public credit of the United States government, and on the expense of the American people. On April 27, 1932, the Federal Reserve outfit sent $750,000 belonging to American bank depositors in gold to Germany. A week later, another $300,000 in gold was shipped to Germany in the same way. About the middle of May, $12 million in gold was shipped to Germany by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. Almost every week there is a shipment of gold to Germany. These shipments are not made for profit on exchange, since German marks are below parity against the dollar. The Catholic-led robbery of the United States was overseen by Papist Don Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., Knight of Malta and patriarch of the famous Catholic Kennedy family. His children, JFK, Robert Kennedy, and Ted Kennedy, would finish the job of destroying this country with their Civil Rights era and its accompanying Pro-Catholic Immigration Act of 1965. Remember, the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 kept America Protestant. The Kennedys' 1964 and 1965 civil rights legislation was the precise target of the Catholic Kennedy family. McFadden's warning was followed the very next year with the infamous business plot, where Kennedy and his fellow Knights of Malta attempted to overthrow the United States government and bring it under the Catholic Nazi regime. The plot was thwarted by Major General Smedley Butler. But of course, Stu Peters is never going to mention this to you and somehow perform mental gymnastics to try and fit this in with their ludicrous idea of Jewish supremacy. So why does our current vassal state of the Vatican fund the nation of Israel? They do so to buttress the Jesuit futurist theology of their Jesuit priests Francisco Ribera and Manuel Lacunza and its accompanying Gog and Magog eschatological theater. This is all done, as historians have laid out for centuries now, to keep people from believing the Pope is the Antichrist. For 300 years, every Protestant denomination taught the Pope was the Antichrist. But along came the Jesuit Baptist eschatology, which deflected away from that and said, no, the Antichrist is a future coming figure.
I think you can say, well, Putin's out of his mind. Yes, maybe so. But at the same time, he's being compelled by God. He went into the Ukraine, but that wasn't his goal. His goal was to move against Israel ultimately, and he will link up with Turkey, with Azerbaijan, across the Dardanelles, and that little bridge, and they will come together. And then you look down into North Sudan, you've got a Muslim country down there, and there they all are. Persia, of course, is Iran, and there is the land that is set up in Ezekiel 38, and you see how Ukraine is key. because of you see the land bridge between Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey, and all of that area is going to be mobilized against Israel in the latter days. And God says, I am going to deal with it. So you can look at your map, you can read your newspapers, you can listen to your news, but know of a fact that God is bringing to pass what he prophesied years ago through his servant Ezekiel. And you read it in the 38th passage of Ezekiel 1 through 6. It's all there. And God is getting ready to do something amazing, and that will be fulfilled. And what Putin is doing by moving as he is to set up Ukraine as a staging ground for one of the armies, and then across is Erdogan at Turkey, and you've got between them that little Dardanelles area, and it's going to happen. So I just say that is what's coming up. Is Putin crazy? Is he mad? Well, perhaps. But God says, I'm going to put hooks in your jaws, and I'm going to draw you into this battle, whether you like it or not. And he's being compelled, after the move into the Ukraine, he's being compelled to move again to get a land bridge and then across the Dardanelles with Turkey, and watch what's going to happen next. You read your Bible because it's coming to pass.
Right before this, that I will destroy all the nations that go to war against Jerusalem. Please read it for yourself. But in the midst of this time, there will be a tremendous trauma for the Jews in Israel. Something unbelievable, horrible. And that's going to cause the Jewish people to become one, to cleave to each other, and turn to Hashem in the midst of a very great mourning of this trauma. This is often called the Messiah, the son of Joseph. That phrase is not in Tanakh, but the Talmud in Tractate Sukkah, that's what it means. It doesn't mean a Messiah, the son of Joseph. It means, in fact, you can see from the words, it's in the plural, it's people getting killed in the midst of this enormous, what otherwise is very, very successful. Do I believe that's what occurred on October 7th? Yeah. Do I believe that's what occurred on October 7th? Yeah. Did I just start talking about this on October 8th? No. We talked about this a long time.
What Pat Robertson just described is the eschatological system created by Jesuit priest Francisco Ribera and Manuel Lacunza. They want people to think that this prophecy is coming to pass, as this event in Ezekiel 38 is said to usher in the Messiah, explicitly in the parallel passage in Zechariah 12. They want us to believe that the futurist interpretation of these passages is coming to pass. The reasons for this are many, such as 1, to protect the Pope from the claim that he is the Antichrist. Also, the theological divisions it creates among Protestant people and the support it gives to the biggest military recruiter in the United States, namely the Baptist Church. But I believe the primary cash out that the elite want out of this Gog and Magog conflict is to present the Pope of Rome as the Savior Messiah of this event. He will in some way, unknown to me at this time, provide a solution or some way of escape out of this bloody conflict that will engulf Jerusalem. He, as always, impersonates the Messiah and puts himself in his place because he is the Antichrist and man of sin.
You've got a foreign state, you've got dual citizens in your government. Who do you think they're supporting?
Roman Catholics are dual citizens, which has been the traditional complaint American people have made about them since the early 1800s.
Right there, Mr. Cutting. Americans are burning.
I don't see no Americans. I see trespassers. Irish hops do a job for a nickel what a nigger does for a dime and a white man used to get a quarter for. What have they done? Name one thing they've contributed. Votes. Votes, you say? They vote how the Archbishop tells them, and who tells the Archbishop? Their king in the pointy hat what sits on his throne in Rome.
At the 9-minute mark, Peters cites possibly the most obvious controlled demolitions I have ever seen. What is so disgusting about this is the melodrama Peters attempts to conjure up here in this section of his documentary. Now, am I saying nothing is happening in Gaza and the entire thing is fake? I don't know, and neither does Peters and company. What I do know is they are using fake bombings, rubber dolls, masquerading as dead and injured bodies, and children in makeup. The following is compliments of Fake Nukes Phil on BitChute. Here we see a supposed mourning family member of a dead young man, but he is acting belligerent, and you see the man next to him starts laughing.
الحمد لله طالع من الصبح صلي الصبح انا وياه جماعه كل يوم يوم بيوم جماعه هيك هيك بتروح هيك طالعين من.
Let's see that again. Here we see a Palestinian gentleman supposedly mourning the death of his granddaughter, and now notice when the girl's arm comes over how it lacks any human bone anatomy and appears to be nothing but a rubber doll with no bones. This is one of the funniest acting scenes from the supposed war in Gaza.
حبيبي الحمد لله خلاص لا يا اخويا لا ايش انت عامل من بعدك طيب ايش انت عامل انا يا الله ايش انت عامل ايش اقول لعمك لما اروح اليوم يا الله ايوه لا لا
Here we see that the 1488ers are just as brainwashed by the mainstream news as most normie liberals are.
Yeah, it's like, so anything that Israel does, okay, and if you criticize it's anti-Semitic, that's just like crazy talk. That's like literally like what the fucking worst dictators enact before they go commit fucking heinous crimes. Is like, you can't fucking criticize us. You know what I mean? Like, that's the first thing they do. It's the first thing the Bolsheviks did, first thing fucking Stalin did, first thing Mao did. You know what I mean? Like, all these dictators that go out and do fucked up things, the first thing that they do is make it illegal to criticize them. And so what are they trying to do in the fucking U.S.? They're trying to make it illegal to criticize Israel. I don't know, maybe they already did. They like definitely like tried to pass some legislation.
I mean, Ron DeSantis passed legislation in Israel for the Sunshine State of Florida making anti-Semitic speech illegal.
No, it's just fucking crazy. Just absolutely fucking.
That is being done to give your movement credibility. They did this with Alex Jones, and his platform exploded after he was taken off of YouTube and Twitter, and sued for his coverage of the Sandy Hook event. The same with Nick Fuentes and Andrew Anglin. Alex Jones and Andrew Anglin both advertise themselves as the most censored men in the world, as their platforms explode and they rake in millions of dollars. Alex Jones, after being supposedly censored on YouTube and Twitter, created banned.video, using the word banned, of course, advertising his apparent persecution. Widespread published persecution is the best thing that can happen to an intellectual or a movement.
Well, so basically what you've just said is that means by de facto, Benjamin Netanyahu is the president of the United States and his government now reigns over ours.
I mean, clearly, when you look at who you can't criticize, and that's who controls you.
No, the real elite stay out of the view of the masses. As we have seen, the main characters that I have presented here are trained by the Jesuits. The Jesuits do not come out in public and take office. They put their disciples into the public view. Since the rise of the mass media and the intelligence agencies that control it, warfare is now primarily psychological, and the main tactic is obviously to shatter your mind so you can never know what is even happening around you. As William Casey, CIA director, said in 1981, as recorded by Barbara Honegger of the Hoover Institution and later the Reagan administration, quote, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false," unquote. This oft-cited quote, "To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize," misattributed to Voltaire, are actually the words of a neo-Nazi, a modern neo-Nazi, named Kevin Alfred Strom in 1993. We're not allowed to criticize black people much more than Jews. Does that mean that black people run the country? Of course not. At the 30-minute mark, Peters focuses our attention on the 9/11 attack and the supposed Jewish control of the attacks.
By the way, Israeli intelligence formed the bulk of the motivation behind these Middle Eastern wars.
In the days after the September attacks, there were countless rumors about strange coincidences surrounding the events. One report about a group of Middle Eastern men spotted the morning of September 11th parked just across the river from New York City has not gone away.
3, 2, 1.
Investigation of their presence has led to questions about whether Israel was conducting espionage on U.S. soil.
I hate to break it to Peter and company, but the 9/11 event was a media hoax. I knew these men were going to try this, so 4 years and 4 months ago I wrote this article. And I learned this, by the way, from Brian Stavely. Please see his work, it is highly suggested. Number 1. As the alleged United Airlines Flight 175 approached the South Tower, you can see one of its wings disappear. Here is the still shot of the cash out here. Notice the right wing of the plane simply disappears. This was obviously some kind of shoddy video production while they were stitching in the CGI into the official footage. Number 2. An hour after the South Tower had been hit, and MSNBC confirmed the building had collapsed, we still see that Flight 175 was in the air.
Are only those that are participating in the FAA radar system, airliners. This does not include anybody in a small Cessna or a small plane who might be flying. Are only those that are participating in the FAA radar system, airliners. This does not include anybody in a small Cessna or a small plane who might be flying.
Number 3. There is no puncture wound in the South Tower, as half of 175 had allegedly penetrated it. Number 4. Airplanes are built out of aluminum, and yet we saw Flight 175 perfectly penetrate the building without even 1 foot of the wings, even the weakest part, being resisted by the steel and the concrete. There were no attacks on 9/11. The entire episode was a media hoax, which the 1488ers have completely fallen for. And yet again, we see the mainstream news doing legwork for the neo-Nazis and giving them material to use against their enemies. This issue cannot be overemphasized, ladies and gentlemen. The 1488ers make the Jewish role in the mass media principal in their argument. Yet we see, over and over again, the mainstream media doing hoaxes and legwork for the benefit of the alt-right. This entire section was a humiliating facepalm as I watched these men descend into complete delusional psychosis. At the 54-minute mark, Peters and company lambaste the Jews as having absolute power in this country, which is absolutely laughable, as I have already proven. The Catholic Kennedy family is the most powerful family in this country, other than the Rockefellers, and they are all Gentile Catholics, the Rockefellers, Baptists, respectively. As I have already shown, the Baptist Church is a creation of the Jesuits.
Incredible cities, incredible architecture, incredible stuff. The United States is becoming more and more depleted because all of the money is being sent to Israel. It's completely occupied by Israel. Israel controls all US foreign policies. All of the wars the United States has fought in the Middle East are all to support Israeli policies. It's a terrible state of affairs, and it has to stop. It has to change.
Ever since the time of Roger Williams and his debate with John Cotton over freedom of religion in our original colonies in the 17th century, the American religious experience in general, but especially in the South, has been dominated by the Baptist Church. Catholic, Orthodox, and even secular authorities maintain that Baptists are Protestant, and that Protestantism has divided up into 40,000 Protestant denominations, a total failure. Yet, I discovered almost 20 years ago that Baptists have historically not seen themselves as Protestant, and that is all by deliberate design. As a matter of fact, from the very beginning of the Reformation, Baptists were considered to be in league with the Jesuits. We read in John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, translated by Henry Beveridge, Book 3, Chapter 3, page 511, quote, "I allude to great numbers of Anabaptists, those of them especially who plume themselves on being spiritual, and their associates, the Jesuits, and others of the same stamp. Such are the fruits which their gurdy spirit produces. That repentance which in every Christian man lasts as long as life is with them completed in a few short days." Unquote.
Baptists have historically promoted the futurist eschatology of the Jesuits, Ribera and Lacunza, respectively. Their theology utterly dominates the religious landscape of the modern West. When I was at Bob Jones University, I left the Baptist Church my third year of school. I was constantly harangued by my friends who would quote from this work, The Baptist Heritage, by Leon H. Leon Macbeth, 4 Centuries of Baptist Witness, where he states, quote, most Baptist views and practices fell in the judgment of the new church leaders in the categories of blasphemies and heresies, could not have brought comfort to the Baptists. In fact, they suffered more severely under the new regime than the old, justifying John Milton's complaint, quote, new presbyter is but old priest writ large, unquote. My Baptist friends and fellow students would constantly harangue me with the persecution that Baptists had received at the hand of those wicked Protestants. A very efficacious Jesuit psyop indeed. To this day, Baptists are adamant that they are not Protestant.
As Baptists, we're not Protestant. Many people like to group Christianity into 2 groups of you're either Catholic or Protestant. Right. And we don't fall into either of those groups because the word Protestant, and many people don't even know this, has the word protest in it, and that's just the Protestant movement where they're protesting the Catholic Church.
When people say, oh, Baptists are Protestants. No, we're not. There's always been a group of people. There's always been a line of people. There's always been a movement of Christianity that's been outside of the Catholic Church, that's been outside of the Protestant Reformation.
So when I hear Catholic and Orthodox apologists appealing to this 40,000 Protestant denominations idea, I am brought back to Calvin's fingering of the Baptist movement with Jesuitism. What Catholic and Orthodox apologists call failed Protestant denominations are actually Jesuit-created anti-Protestant psyops. This objection is a Jesuit-manufactured Catholic apologetic technique designed to manufacture problems that they can blame on their enemies and convince people to go back to the Catholic Church.
The Baptist Mercantile Order's war against the Protestant Reformation, the Papist and Orthobro theory of an Anglo-American establishment refuted. In order to justify and bestow virtue on their abject failure as men, many white men in the West are adopting Catholic and Eastern Orthodox sympathies in order to garner a status of victimization and blame the current plight of the West on the Protestant Reformation. Sarcasm intensifies. You see his loneliness and failure in life as a product of his country's failure in previous generations, especially the boomers, to see the fallacy of the Protestant Reformation and their alliance with the infamous Mercantile Order. As I will demonstrate later, the Mercantile Order is Baptist, not Protestant. And as I showed in my video here, Robertson, Genes and Company, Not by Scripture Alone, Part 5, Baptist, not Protestant, I proved the notion that the Baptist Church was begun as a Jesuit counter-Reformation technique. The Socinians were the first model, and I hate to break it to you, the Socinians were Baptists. They believed in believers' baptism with immersion-style baptism. They were Baptists. The Baptist Church came out of the Socinian movement, which was created by the Jesuits. All right. And it's clear corporate conspiracy to subvert traditional sexual morals. John Calvin allowed for usury in Geneva, and many powerful banking firms arose in Protestant Switzerland as a result. The Protestant work ethic was a psyop designed to take Catholic men away from their critical duties of mentally masturbating to Platonic metaphysics and compel them into factories to slave away for the mercantile order. This clearly shows that modern white men are victims of their ancestors' foolish decision to become Protestant, and now seeing he is a victim of his ancestors' systematic failure, he is now justified to LARP as a Catholic or Orthodox Christian on the internet and accomplish very little with his life because, he's a victim, not a failure. Of course, much of my above gloss was sarcastic and vicious, as I love roasting the needs. Now to the refutation of the modern Western derelict man, and to demonstrate that the modern mercantile order is a direct product of the Roman papacy, and in an open league with the Jesuits to destroy the Protestant Reformation, and to bring the Western world back into alliance with Rome via its masterpiece, the Baptist Church. The Pope of Rome, number 1. The Pope of Rome is the one who legalized usury in Europe years before John Calvin said anything to the matter. You can see Pope Leo X, Fifth Lateran Council, Papal Encyclicals, Session 10, May 4th, 1515, and you want to start with the paragraph that begins, "We wish to make suitable arrangements." Okay, I'll bring up the website right here. It's straight from the Papal Encyclicals website, ladies and gentlemen, right here. Okay, so we wish to make suitable. This paragraph right here. That's the hard nuts right there, where the Pope is the one who legalized usury in Europe, ladies and gentlemen, years before John Calvin said anything to the matter. That's hard on you boys. That's real hard. Rome Rules, Veritas Equitas, who's a friend of mine, has made a couple videos buttressing this point of the Roman rule of the banking industry. You can see his video here, The Vatican is not owned by the Rothschilds, and you can also see his video, International Banking, Catholic Dominated, not Hook-Nose Dominated. That was 4 years ago. Okay. Number 2, the mercantile order has made its league with the Jesuits open and clear. You can see the Last Will and Testament of Cecil John Rhodes, edited by W.T. Stead, 1902, where he says, and I quote, speaking of Mr. Rhodes, he aspired to be the creator of one of those vast semi-religious quasi-political associations which, like the Society of Jesus, have played such a large part in the history of the world. To be more strictly accurate, he wished to found an order as to the instrument of the will of the dynasty, and while he lived, he dreamed of being its Caesar and its Loyola. So he's copying the Jesuits, ladies and gentlemen. And it says the same thing on page 64. Please remember the key of my idea discussed with you. This is Mr. Rhodes' exact words. Is a society copied from the Jesuits. Not merely inspired, not some loose association, copied directly from the Jesuits. He clearly showed that he was in league with them. As to organization, the practical solution, a differential rate, and a copy of the United States Constitution, etc., etc. Number 3, the chief of the mercantile order, the Rockefellers, Baptists, are the most responsible for the creation of the ecumenical movement and its agenda to reunite Protestants with Rome. This matter was dealt with in 1952 when Rockefeller Internationalist, The Man Who Misrules the World, by Emanuel Josephson. I'll pull this book up. This is an extremely important book. This is by Emanuel Josephson. This shows a lot of the dirt on the Rockefellers and their support and really their creation of the modern ecumenical movement, ladies and gentlemen. The whole modern ecumenical movement is to bring everybody back into communion with Rome. John D. Rockefeller Jr. was the man who brought the interchurch world movement into prominence. Okay, you can see this Cambridge publication, John D. Rockefeller Jr. and the Interchurch World Movement, 1919 to 1920, a different angle on the ecumenical movement. Okay, you can see the National Council of Churches from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, showing the support that it was given by the Rockefellers. You can see this New York Times article. It's an old article from 1949. Church Council gets Rockefeller grant. Okay, so who funded and created the modern ecumenical movement? The Rockefeller family, ladies and gentlemen. Rockefeller Jr. wanted Protestant denominations to start compromising their doctrinal differences and reunite. This was an early stage for them to later reunite with Rome. Okay, the Rockefellers continued their program with the National Council of Churches and the Federal Council of Churches, and I just showed you the receipts on that. Now, where is the clear proof that the ecumenical movement is Roman in its essence? This is to bring everyone back into communion with Rome. This is from Christianity, a Social and Cultural History, Prentice Hall, and you got a number of different professors from all over the country who were authored this work, and then this is on page 380 and 381. Quote, the years up to 1968, when the WCC, that's the World Council of Churches, held its fourth assembly at Uppsala, Sweden, included a number of important ecumenical events. One of the most significant of these was the rapid development of relations with the Roman Catholic Church. Only weeks after the Third Assembly in New Delhi, Pope John XXIII announced that the Second Vatican Council would meet together the following year and invited the World Council of Churches to send observers to the sessions of the Council. It soon became evident that this Pope would facilitate far-reaching changes in the Roman Catholic attitude toward other churches. The 78-year-old Pope expressed his intention that the Council would be a means of spiritual and apostolic renewal and updating of the Church in modern times and a service to the unity of the Church. The Pope emphasized the Church's duty to work actively for the full, visible unity in truth among all Christians in a fullness of charity that should extend also to non-Christians, etc., etc., etc. This striving for the reunion of separated confessions is one of the most significant aspects of the modern church history, okay, etc., etc. So we clearly see that the point of the ecumenical movement was to reunite the Protestants back into union with Rome. Next, John Foster Dulles, trustee of the Rockefeller Foundation, dominated the Federal Council of Churches, later the National Council of Churches. You can see this was a doctoral dissertation by Albert Keim. The name of it is John Foster Dulles and the Federal Council of Churches, 1937 to 1949. You see the Chateau de Beausset, how a vibrant community rose and still thrives today, World Council of Churches. This is straight from the World Council of Churches website. Who funded it, ladies and gentlemen? Baptist Nelson Rockefeller. The first General Secretary of the World Council of Churches was a Dutch Wilhelm Weiser, who got a grant of $500,000 from Baptist Nelson Rockefeller when they were looking for a home in the future ecumenical institute, etc., etc. Again, you see the Rockefeller family are Baptists. Okay. The Baptist Church is, in America, it is the hand of the Counter-Reformation here. The Baptists are the biggest problem we have in this country, okay, that specific denomination, okay. And you see the Ford Foundation also hosts numerous World Council of Church events, okay. This is the event was held at the Ford Foundation. You can see this World Council of Churches article. Children need to reconcile the world, etc. Yeah, this is an event held at the Ford Foundation. So you see the mercantile order is all on board this, ladies and gentlemen. They're all on board. Okay. Number 4, the University of Chicago, which was that is a Baptist college founded by John D. Rockefeller to be a Baptist college. The origin is also the origin of higher criticism of the Bible in America. In my essay against the documentary hypothesis, you can see this right here on my blog. It's been available for free for years. Okay, I demonstrated that the Jesuits fomented the higher criticism of the Bible in Germany as a fulfillment of Joachim's agenda to end text liturgy and hierarchy. This agenda was continued by the ancient servants of the Jesuits, the Baptist Church, funded by the mercantile order. Enter R.A. Torrey in the development of fundamentalism as a response to higher criticism. In the Fundamentals, a testimony to the truth by R.A. Torrey. It's this book right here, this set of books right here. I read these when I was in college. It's called the Fundamentals. Okay, I read all this when I was in college. This was a multi-volume set that I read when I was in college. These volumes created the fundamentalist movement in America as a response to higher criticism of the Bible coming out of Chicago. Gee, why was R.A. Torrey so concerned about higher criticism of the Bible? Because he was an evangelist in Chicago. Enter the ministry of William Rainey Harper, the appointee of John D. Rockefeller himself, and I'll be quoting from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, a history from 1859 to 2009 by Gregory Wills. This is published by Oxford University Press. I will be quoting beginning on page 180. This is serious history right here, ladies and gentlemen. When Augustus H. Strong persuaded John D. Rockefeller to underwrite an effort to establish a great Baptist university, Strong pressed Broadus. Broadus was a very popular Baptist scholar back in like the 19th century, early 20th century. Broadus hard to accept nomination as president of the proposed school. Strong pressed Broadus hard to accept nomination as president of the proposed school. He had already recruited a young Baptist scholar, William Rainey Harper, to take a leading role, and now he felt he needed only Broadus's consent to be the head. Strong argued that Southern Baptist Theological Seminary was now established, and Broadus was needed for a bigger enterprise. Quote, "There is no man in the country who is at once the confidence of Mr. Rockefeller and the denomination like yourself. There is no man whose wisdom and experience are more needed or would be more influential than your own in the molding and shaping of such an institution as I have in mind, even as there is no man who could exert a stronger influence in favor of its establishment. I ask you favorably to consider the proposition to give yourself for the remainder of your life to this work rather than to the more limited work of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary." Rockefeller summoned Broadus to his Cleveland estate to discuss the matter in 1887. Broadus afterward told Strong that he could not be considered for the post. His work at the seminary was too important. Strong's repeated pleas were unavailing. Broadus remained at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and became president 2 years later. William Rainey Harper accepted the presidency of Rockefeller's new Baptist University, the University of Chicago, in 1891. I mean, you can read my book on the common law. I have a whole section in there as well about why the Baptist Church was so important to the mercantile order. What was one of the biggest reasons why the Baptist Church was chosen? Because they didn't believe in Sabbath keeping. And that meant neither Saturday or Sunday was the Sabbath, and that way the mail could run every day of the week. It was a mercantile decision. William Rainey Harper was the principal of the Chautauqua's School of Religion. Every year he pleaded with Broadus to teach and promised him top pay. In 1889, Harper promised to pay him $750 for 3 weeks' work, equal to 3 months of his seminary salary. Okay, etc., etc. His participation was problematic. Harper was becoming the most popular and effective proponent of the new historical criticism in America. Okay. Quote, "Harper never made it his intention to become a leader of the movement toward liberal theology. He intended to be an advocate of education and led a remarkably effective movement in the education of laypersons in theology, Bible, and even Hebrew and Greek. His inclinations were always to give preference to the conservative side of things, but scholarship was a higher value than conservatism. Over time, as scholarship tended toward liberal theology, Harper's views of the Bible became more liberal. In 1889, because he's being more and more influenced by the Jesuits there in Chicago. I've already talked about that a lot. Chicago's a monster hotbed for the Yoakamite Catholic agenda. You can read my book, The Timeline of Jesuit Intrigue. I go into that in detail. In 1889, when Rockefeller, that was where Jeremiah Crowley came out of. Jeremiah Crowley was a Catholic priest, and he came out against it. He wrote a bunch of books. He's well-known ex-Catholic priest who was exposing what was going on in Chicago. In 1889, when Rockefeller tapped Harper to lead the new university in Chicago, few suspected his orthodoxy. T.T. Eaton, who with his sister Josephine Peck, ran Kentucky's Western Recorder with remarkable sensitivity to the least aberration from orthodoxy, ran a series of articles from Harper on the study of the Old Testament. Broadus was caught in the middle. He admired John D. Rockefeller, and their friendship was genuine. He felt the same about Harper. Broadus respected Harper and many other historical critical scholars, and wanted to avoid rupturing his relationship with them personally and institutionally. Broadus rejected Harper's methods and conclusions, but maintained cordial cooperation with him and other historical critical scholars. Okay, continuing. This is page 182. An incident in Chicago illustrated well these tensions. At a Bible conference of some 1,500 pastors and college students, Harper and Charles Briggs, professor of Old Testament at Union Theological Seminary in New York, argued for their historical critical approach, for example, rejecting the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch. There you go, folks. Who is the one who created, ladies and gentlemen, the institution to attack the Bible, the cornerstone of the Protestant Reformation, to attack the principal doctrine of sola scriptura? Who was it, ladies and gentlemen? The Mercantile Order. Oh, but I thought the Mercantile Order was Protestant. No. So obsessed was the Rockefeller family with higher criticism of the Bible, Edith Rockefeller, daughter of John D. Rockefeller, acquired an ancient Greek New Testament manuscript of the Eastern Canon for Professor Edgar Goodspeed, now known as the Rockefeller-McCormick Manuscript. You can see that right here on JSTOR, the Rockefeller-McCormick Manuscript. They're obsessed with textual criticism. Number 5, and this is a monster. The Rockefeller takeover of Saudi oil broke the supremacy of the Protestant British Empire. The reason why the Protestant British Empire descends hard at this point, okay, is because the Rockefellers subjugated them in the Middle East over the Saudi oil. Okay, you can see this article here. Mr. 5%, the complex story of oil in the Middle East. You can see the war that took place between the Rockefellers and the British Empire over the Saudi oil. Quote, along with the war, Britain placed a lien on German shares in the company. Armenians under Russian influence in Anatolia who prevented oil transportation were exiled by the Young Turks. 2 years later, the Bolsheviks, including Stalin, who had risen in fame with his strikes at the Rothschild oil refinery, seized power in Russia. Thus, Standard Oil, which disabled the British companies, then made an agreement with the Bolsheviks for Baku oil. Okay, and you have this. You can see this article on Reuters. Saudi Aramco, the oil colossus, talks about this as well. Yeah, the Rockefellers subjugated the British Empire. They won a war with them over the Saudi oil, an economic war, political war. Okay. That was the end of the supremacy of the British Empire, ladies and gentlemen. So much for the papist and ortho-bro theory of an Anglo-American establishment. The New World Order is a Gnostic and Baptist mercantile order. All right? And as I've pointed out, the theology of the Baptist, you can read my article on what's new about the New Covenant, where Dr. Fairbairn has a whole section in his books on how the Baptist religion was just a remake of Gnosticism. It was just a remake of the radical difference between the Old and the New Testaments. That was a major point of the Baptist religion. Number 6, William F. McMurray and Associates. You can see their law firm website here. A law firm in Louisville, Kentucky, has exposed the alliance of the American government and the Roman Catholic Church in protecting Catholic priests who abuse young children in their parishes and schools. So much for the Catholic Counter-Reformation theory that the New World Order is an Anglo-American Protestant establishment. The capitalist mercantile order ended the supremacy of the Protestant British Empire with the development of Aramco and ended the free market agrarian patriarchal and whole milk system of America with their Civil War and their subsequent New Deal and Civil Rights era, a fulfillment of John D. Rockefeller's General Education Board, all to the benefit of the Jesuit papacy. You see here from the Rockefeller Archive on the General Education Board created by John D. Rockefeller, what was the point of public education in America, ladies and gentlemen? Racial and gender equality, which is exactly the opposite of what had been originally established here, and which you read my article I have on Madison's book, The Conquering of the Great Race, and hold on. The Passing of the Great Race. That was the name of the book. Yeah, he talks about how the Protestants were always nationalistic. I mean, that was just a part of the Protestant Reformation. When the Protestant Reformation broke the Roman Empire, we just split into nation states, and that was the Treaty of Westphalia. Nationalism in the West was created by the Protestant Reformation. It's inherently ethnic in its essence. And who came to break that? The Jesuit Baptist Mercantile Order, ladies and gentlemen. And that this capitalist establishment that was created here by John D. Rockefeller and the Ford Foundation, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, this was all a way to subvert the original system that we had set up here in America in the colonies. Okay, so it's the American law system was the pre-New Deal, anti-federalist, agrarian free market system. That's what we originally set up. These guys destroyed all that. Rockefeller, the Carnegies, the Ford Foundation, the Vanderbilts, they destroyed this and created a new system. And it's a Jesuit system. Okay? All right. And the American establishment has shown itself the bosom buddy of the papacy, as I and Rome rules, Veritas Equitas, have demonstrated for years now in our database. Oh, and you can look when Franklin Delano Roosevelt is giving his proclamation about the national banking emergency. Look who's sitting right behind him, who's standing right behind him, ladies and gentlemen. It's a bunch of Knights of Columbus with that white chapeau flowing around in the wind right behind him. It was Catholic, ladies and gentlemen. The modern capitalist mercantile order is Catholic. Okay? You can see my database here, The Ultimate Guide Against Neo-Nazis and the Alt-Right, where we've shown that the modern American establishment, which has nothing to do with the original way things were set up here, very little to do with the way it was set up here. They've completely overturned our law system in this country. Is predominantly Catholic. All the highest positions of authority are papist. And then you look here, Theodore Hesborough, the famous Roman Catholic priest, named Rockefeller Foundation chairman. Anglo-American establishment, Protestant, with a Catholic priest as its chairman? Interesting. You can also see this Notre Dame news. Rockefeller Foundation supports resident fellowships. They fund Notre Dame. They fund this other Catholic university. Okay. You see the Koch Foundation. That's a huge mercantile family right there. Who are they funding, ladies and gentlemen? Catholic organizations. Okay. Now let's deal with some objections. Didn't John Courtney Murray's CIA-backed doctrinal warfare campaign and the Rockefeller-backed Vatican II destroy the traditional Catholic Church? Doesn't this prove that the mercantile order is anti-Catholic? Now, you understand there's not just one version of Catholicism. There's the traditional feudal version, but then there's this tradition of the monks, championed, of course, by Joachim Meister Eckhart. Okay? The mercantile order, answer. The mercantile order is the traditional feudal Catholic. The mercantile order is against the traditional feudal Catholic theology and a supporter of the Joachimite Catholic theology championed by the Jesuits. You can see here in the Secret Instructions of the Jesuits, chapter 17, section 6, I show how the Jesuits claim to be continuing the prophecies of Joachim of Fiore. There have been competing factions within the Catholic Church for many centuries. The mercantile order is supportive of the institution of the Catholic Church, but only considered Joachimite and Jesuitical in its theology. And I think the whole thing, the whole ecumenical movement and all that, these are not ways to weaken the church. They are a sly and seductive way to repair the church. It's not against the Catholic Church. It's a way to repair the church and to fulfill the prophecies of Joachim. Another objection. Drake, the Protestant work ethic is a psyop. Metaphysics and theology is life, man. Answer. The Protestant work ethic is how you afford a dowry and keep women in their place. But since you Christians have historically rejected the Middle Eastern notions of patriarchy, you have historically, and in a greater degree today, failed with women. You men have created the monsters who are afflicting you. That means you're not a victim. As Edward Bernays, whose work was funded by John D. Rockefeller Jr., pointed out in his propaganda, the church had failed to solve any theological disputes by the turn of the 20th century. Men had for centuries wasted their life going back and forth on meaningless disputes and distinctions in metaphysics. The mercantile order felt completely justified undermining the Bible and theology and making use of men in their factories. I hate to break it to you, they were right. But let me remind you, the Rockefellers were Baptists, not Protestants. And they've done everything they can to undermine the Reformation with their higher criticism. Christian theology had obscured biblical religion so badly that Western men gave up on serious religion, resulting in the boomer generation you young men hate so much. Traditional Christian men created the need for the mercantile order and their agenda to end text liturgy and hierarchy, as Jefferson concludes correctly. This is his letter to John Adams, July 5th, 1814. This is a black pill right here. Quote, "The doctrines which flowed from the lips of Jesus himself are within the comprehension of a child, but thousands of volumes have not yet explained the Platonisms engrafted on them, and for this obvious reason that nonsense can never be explained. Their purposes, however, are answered. Plato is canonized, and is now deemed as impious to question his merits, as those of an apostle of Jesus." Disgusting. He is peculiarly appealed to as an advocate of the immortality of the soul, and yet I will venture to say that there were no better arguments than his in proof of it. Not a man in the world would believe it. It is fortunate for us that Platonic republicanism has not obtained the same favor as Platonic Christianity, or we should have now been all living men, women, and children pell-mell together like the beasts of the field or forest. Unquote. And thus, ladies and gentlemen, let me summarize that last point. The reason why the mercantile order had such power, had such influence over the minds of the people here, is because Christianity tried to synthesize Platonism with the Bible. And this ended up with thousands of factions and confusions. And the boomer generation just gave up on theology because of this decision to synchronize Platonism with the Bible. That's why they gave up on it. And that gave the mercantile order and John D. Rockefeller the justification to end theological life and philosophical life. And life was just about working in factories and making money and living the American dream with a white picket fence, i.e. the boomer raison d'etre. Okay? So this is the Anglo-American Protestant establishment theory refuted, that the Reformation has been under relentless siege by the Baptist mercantile order. We see the most influential political figures of our country. John D. Rockefeller, the creator of the modern public school, the creator of the Industrial Revolution. Earl Warren, the judge behind the Brown versus Board of Education case. Abraham Lincoln, Abraham Maslow, the father of modern humanistic psychology. Martin Luther King Jr., Francis Willard, the head of the modern feminist movement. Alfred Kinsey, the man who created the sexual revolution. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the man who created our modern economic system. All of these men are either Catholics or they are a member of an organization created by the Jesuits. Again, the Methodist and Baptist churches were created by the Jesuits for Counter-Reformation purposes. Every good criminal knows how to stay out of the spotlight and not to draw too much attention to himself. Frank Lucas, the famous drug lord in Harlem, New York, said that his downfall was due to one night wearing a $100,000 chinchilla fur coat and sitting up close in the Muhammad Ali-Joe Frazier fight in 1971. When the Kennedy family was advocating for the complete overthrow of the United States government and made it a vassal state of the Vatican with their repeal of the Johnson-Reed Act, they didn't say that openly, as to not draw too much attention to themselves. Instead, they said they were advocating for the rights of black people. At the 55-minute mark, Peters and company present this collage of what they believe to be the proof that the Jews control the United States government. This is a weak collage, as I have another for their consideration. Again, Joe Biden, Irish Roman Catholic, President of the United States. Vice President Kamala Harris, Jesuit trained at the University of San Francisco, Gentile. Chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, Jerome Powell, Jesuit trained Roman Catholic, Gentile. The head of the CIA, Bill Burns, Gentile, radical Roman Catholic. And on and on. These collages the 1488ers produce are an attempt to deflect away from the past 100 years of American history. 1488ers are not people who read books. They do not know American history. These are the kind of people who watch videos on YouTube. The spoiling of American gold, the depreciating of our currency, and the civil rights legislation of the Catholic Kennedy family, and the Patriot Act of Catholic Viet D. Dean, professor of Jesuit Georgetown University, are the most significant political events in our country in the past 100 years, and no amount of collages these men produce are going to change what happened here. The Jesuits did this during the French Dreyfus Affair of the late 19th and early 20th century in France, with their publication of La Civiltà Cattolica in their pathetic attempt to blame France's problems on the Jews. Not surprising, the infamous protocols of the learned elders of Zion are of the same origin. Leo Lehman states in his Behind the Dictators, page 15, quote, although the first published in Russia in 1903, the Protocols of Zion had their origin in France and date from the Dreyfus Affair, of which the Jesuits were the chief instigators. These protocols of supposedly Jewish leaders are not the first documents of their kind fabricated by the Jesuits. For over 100 years before these protocols appeared, the Jesuits had continued to make use of a similar fraud called the Secrets of the Elders of Bourg Fontaine against Jansenism, an anti-Jesuit French Catholic movement among the secular clergy, unquote. The exact same agenda is taking place in our country now and has been for decades. It's the same play, the same formation, and the same snap count. The Catholic Church has done this numerous times. They know exactly what they're doing, and it usually works every single time. On the contrary, what you think are Israelite political interests are actually coming from the Baptist Church. What Max Egan thinks is the Nation of Israel is actually a Baptist organization called Christians United for Israel, headed up by Baptist Don John Hagee. Christians United for Israel is the most powerful lobbying organization in Washington that controls our American foreign policy. And I have shown before, if you see the Baptist Church, you are looking at the fingerprints of the Jesuits. As I have shown, the Baptist Church was created by the Jesuits and is the leading influence behind bringing Protestant people back into communion with Rome through the Baptist ecumenical movement.
So for all you Christians out there, you're very important. Indeed, very important to a certain group. The Bolsheviks felt this way, and their first order of business in this so-called revolution of theirs was to exterminate the Christians. Not just exterminate, make a point of killing them. Not just killing them, torturing them.
The Russian Christians were treated in such a harsh manner because they are Eastern Orthodox, the ancient enemies of the Roman papacy, having broken from the Rome in 1054. In 1917, the Roman Catholic Lady of Fatima hoax began in May and lasted for 6 consecutive months. Ending October 13th, it called for the conversion of Orthodox Russia. Papists today claim this appearance of the Virgin Mary was even predictive of the Second World War itself. The festival having ended on October 13th, the Bolshevik Revolution began October 25th, 1917, 12 days later, bringing the Russian Orthodox Church to its knees. Ask yourself, sir, who benefited? The Roman Catholic Church. And again, far from the Soviet regime being Jewish, Stalin intended to massacre the Jews and to persecute them, as we've already seen. The Bolshevik Revolution was buttressed by the following papists: Theodore Mally, Knight of Malta Joseph P. Grace, who provided funding to the Bolsheviks, according to the work of Anthony Sutton; Jesuit priest Edmund Walsh, who worked with Vladimir Lenin to bring the Jesuits and Catholicism back into Russia after being previously exiled by the Russian Tsars; and finally, Jesuit General Vladimir Ledachowski.
Anybody who believed in God there ain't no place for you. We have Theodor Herzl, who would be known as the father of Zionism. And we have a guy who is known as Karl Marx, but his real name is Moses Mordecai Levy. He is descended from a long line of real, quantifiable Talmudic Jews.
Marx got all of his doctrines from Father Bex, from work in South America among the Guarani. What Mr. O'Keefe is not going to tell you is that his Talmudic background had nothing to do with his work. His communism came straight from the Jesuits, primarily Father Beck, as reported by Bismarck. See, in the interview with Karl Marx, Chicago Tribune, January 5, 1879, Marx is asked, quote, "It is said that you are the head and front of socialism, Doctor, and from your villa here pull the wires of all the associations, revolutions, etc. now going on. What do you have to say about it?" The old gentleman smiled. "I know it. It is very absurd, yet it has a comic side. For 2 months previous to the attempt of Hodel, Bismarck complained in his North German Gazette that I was in league with Father Beck, the leader of the Jesuit movement, and that we were keeping the socialist movement in such a condition that he could do nothing with it." Unquote. The man Bismarck was referring to was this man, Peter Jean Bex, who was indeed the general of the Jesuit order at this time. You see, for over 100 years leading up to this interview, the Jesuits had perfected the economic system of communism in their reduction missions in South America among the Guarani. A movie was made about these events titled The Mission, with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons. It is, in my view, the most important political movie ever made. A modern professor named Richard Kane at Illinois State University specialized in this field and began teaching a cohort in this field at the university. For his efforts, he had his life destroyed and received numerous death threats. I know this man personally and have had numerous conversations with him about what happened. He was forced to leave the country in hiding, and his life as he knew it in the United States has been completely annihilated.
So let's get this straight for those that don't understand. Adolf Hitler, whatever has been put in your mind about who this man is, a man who was the most popularly democratically elected leader in all of Europe, named Adolf Hitler, wins an election.
There are no elections. Hitler was put into power by Pope Pius XII and Wall Street bankers, most likely Papist Joseph Kennedy and J. Peter Grace. There are no political solutions to our problems in 2024. There are no elections. There are only selections by the elite, the same way it has always been done from time immemorial. And I seriously doubt there is any mass solution today, either not only due to lack of resources, but also due to the pathetic state of the people. These people do not deserve a solution to their problems. In my view, the best steps forward to prepare for any future solutions are, number 1, religious reformation, a la Nazarene Judaism, as I have proposed in my books, the building of Nazarene congregations and the formation of a presbytery. Number 2, the building of Lannister-like noble family power structures. Number 3, radical movements to eradicate entertainment technology. If you want something to change in this country, you are going to have to find a way to get rid of these devices. Nothing will change until these copes are taken away from the people. I have dealt with thousands of these young men, and I know what I'm talking about. The people do not need each other. As soon as one of these Western men even tried to become part of a serious movement, he's going to have to face accountability. And as soon as you try to hold him accountable, he's going to run back to his screens. Either a computer screen or a TV so he can play video games and watch cheap movies. Nothing will change in this country until these devices are gone. The men do not need each other. They will not work together with each other because they don't need each other. Why? They have their screens. They have their internet towers and their TV broadcasting towers and their video games. Their free porn and their cheap movies. And now I'm going to speak directly to the sexual problems in this country. And I'm going to say the exact opposite of what you want me to say. Contrary to the red pill, I believe that women are much more trustworthy today than the men are. And I'll give you a reason why. As I've already stated, men don't need each other now. Men used to need each other for survival. They don't need that anymore. We live in a comfortable, conquered land with no big enemies, except for maybe some wild animals out in the countryside. Men don't need each other anymore. And when the men don't need each other and they have their screens, they're not going to work together. As soon as you tell one of these young men he needs to work harder to contribute to the community, he's going to freak out on you. He's going to have a complete emotional and mental meltdown, and he's going to run back to his screens. Now, there is a biological connection between men and women. Women do need men, and men need women. There is an emotional, intimate, sexual need that men and women have with each other. And I think, given the conditions of 2024, you can trust women more than you can trust men. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I have dealt with thousands of men in this country. I have known many women, and I believe I can trust women in this country more than I can trust the men. Women need men for provision. Women need men for affection and sex. Our fellow so-called brothers and countrymen, they don't need that. They don't need that from the men. What men primarily need, they can get on their screens. And they are willing to stick their head in the sand and watch the world burn. This is the personality of men in America in 2024. And now let me give you one of the most sinister psyops and copes that exist in America today, and that is the cope of political LARPing. The most potent form of pacification that I've seen from men who are actually somewhat willing to resist what's going on here is deluding men into thinking that being part of online truth movements will change anything. I cannot fathom how many years men waste on the internet truth-seeking and online forums and podcasts that lead them nowhere and have no solutions for their problems. This is probably the most sinister of the psyops that exist in our day, possibly more dangerous than TV and porn. There must be the rise of a grassroots movement, and the only way that will be possible is when these devices are gone. The internet is too big of a cope, not only with the free movies and the porn and the games. This delusion of debating and layman scholarship on the internet is vital for our pacification. Most men on the internet and in these truther groups simply do not have the education or the intellectual abilities to deliberate these very complicated political, philosophical, and religious problems that we have. And you see these men, they're on the internet for decades, and it never goes anywhere. And most of them, after being on the internet doing so-called research for decades, just end up more clueless, confused, and mentally shattered than when they started. So I personally do not see any way this can be done through the political process. In order to do things through the political process, you have to have a mass of people united and on the same page. And that's fundamentally not going to happen as long as internet towers, TV broadcasting, free movies, the free porn, the video games, this is not going to happen until these devices are gone.
That he would take the resources of the nation, and that would become the birthright of the people of Germany, which by this point when he won, they were on their knees. Germans were starving by the millions, as were Americans at this time, because in 1929, the bankers crashed the economy of the world. The bankers, the same ones that declared war on Germany. Right. So, the bankers instigate the banking crash, and millions, tens of millions are starving, malnourished, unemployed, economy worth nothing, money worth nothing.
And who were the bankers? What man was an expert in stock market manipulation in New York at the time? Was the most powerful, high-finance gangster in New York at the time, having bought out the police and was a direct business partner of the Italian mafia in bringing illegal liquor to the harbors of New York. Who was a firm supporter of visceral papist Charles Coughlin, who basically ran the exact same narrative as Hitler did here in the United States in the 1930s? What man pulled out of the stock market right before it crashed, and what man possessed, in the words of Time magazine, quote, a passion for facts, a complete lack of sentiment, and a marvelous sense of timing, unquote? Who? Joseph P. Kennedy. You know, the man who has also funneled our gold into the hands of Hitler's regime, just when our economy was in despair at his hands? And remember, the Jews are supposed to be controlling the banking system. No, this was the work of Joseph P. Kennedy.
I always hear this pushback about Hitler taking Rothschild money. But you got to understand that he took what they took from the German people back from them. It wasn't even about him selling out. It's almost like, you took this from the German people. Well, okay, I'm going to allow you to co-sign me, and I'm going to run with this, bitch.
There was money that was invested into Germany. Yes, there was dirty money, there was clean money, but was there any deal like, okay, you give me this and I'll give you that? Smarty pants out there thinks that, yeah, that was the deal. It's absolute bullshit is what it is.
Right? He did the best he could. He had a real threat, and he had to deal with it. And okay, we can look back and say the way he dealt with it was not the ideal. There was probably something better he could have done. And he shipped some of them off to Palestine to get rid of them, under the Havara Agreement. So he had to cut a deal with these people because they played themselves into a position of power where you have to deal with them. You can't ignore them. So he cut a deal with some of them to get Germany out from under the yoke of the worldwide war against the German economy.
So the Jews created a monster of their own making that spoke out and ended usury? I'm sorry, but that's a special kind of stupid Jew. I don't think you really want to give up that. That is your linchpin. Once you lose usury, it's over.
Your quagmire there rests on a false premise. Your conclusion doesn't make sense because your premise is false. The Jews did not and do not control banking. At this time, Joseph P. Kennedy was the man who ran banking, ran the legal system, had paid them all off. They were all in his pocket, and he was also known as an expert in stock market manipulation. Secondly, the Rothschilds are the Vatican bankers. And I would refer you to Rome Rules video, The Vatican is not owned by the Rothschilds. Now, why would the Rothschilds and Wall Street give Hitler money? I'll tell you. To get millions of Protestant Germans and Russian Orthodox Christians, the two greatest enemies of the Roman papacy, to kill each other in the millions. Adolf Hitler gained the loyalty of the German people with his social and economic policies that benefited them greatly, and then led them to the slaughter, to the great satisfaction of Pope Pius XII, the man who put him into power.
We saw the same thing in Weimar. A lot of these themes as far as exploring the fluidity of gender, aiming that idea at children, exploiting the sexuality of children. These are things that have already happened. In many ways, what we're looking at is history repeating itself. And I would say that if you look at who's controlling the media, because all of this culture is downstream from the media, all of these concepts are shoehorned into our culture through the media, through these giant corporations like Netflix and Hulu and all these different things. If you look at who is at the top, the organizations that control these, giant cultural entities, there's always Jews at the top of them. So it's hard to take those two things in conjunction and say, well, sure, historically there's a precedence for this having happened already. And well, sure, there is seemingly the same events taking place right now in modern day. You can trace them down to the very last names. It would be hard to separate those in my mind and say, no, they don't have anything to do with it.
As we have seen multiple times in our response to the footage we have seen from Gaza and the 9/11 event, the mainstream media is doing legwork for the 1488ers, not the Jews. These hoaxes that are being performed on mainstream media are to vilify and demonize the Jews. The people who have specialized in this study have come to the conclusion that the mass media in Hollywood are controlled by the CIA and the Pentagon, and as we have seen already, these institutions are anti-Semitic and Catholic controlled.
So Kanye West and a lot of people believe that this idea that the Jews control the media, right? Now watch this. At the same time, these people believe that the Jewish state, Israel, is oppressing the Arab Palestinians. Now, you and I were discussing earlier that we have zero contact with reality. The model of reality that we have in our heads comes through the media. So if Kanye West believes that the Israeli state is oppressing the Arab Palestinians, the only reason he believes that is because the media has made him believe that. His contact with the Arab-Israeli conflict is entirely mediated. It comes through the big media, right? So if he believes that the Israeli state is oppressing the Palestinians, that model is in his head because of the media. There's no other way to get the model. He's not a historian. He's not studying, he's not chasing down, exotic little facts like a scientist. He's just absorbing whatever happens in the media, right? So if he believes the Israeli state is oppressing the Palestinians, he shouldn't believe that the Jews control the media. Why would the Jews control the media to make him believe that the Israeli state is the bad guy? Obviously, if he believes the Israeli state is the bad guy and his only contact with reality is the media, the first hypothesis should be, if you're going to defend a conspiracy theory, your first hypothesis should be that the enemies of the Jews control the media. Otherwise, why are you so sure that the Jews are bad? Right? But no, his conspiracy theory is exactly the opposite. He believes that the Jews control the media, even though his picture of the world, which came through the media, tells him that the Jews are bad. That makes no sense.
But in order to understand the origin of the sexual deviancy that permeates our modern culture, you have to understand the person of Alfred Kinsey and the historical development of his sexual revolution with the Pelagian Christians, Wesley's doctrine of perfection, Charles Finney, John Humphrey Noyes, into the Oneida community. The sexual degeneracy of our modern world comes directly from this strain of thought. The crowned and conquering child character in Aleister Crowley comes directly from the three-age prophecy of Catholic monk Joachim of Fiore, who called for the end of text, liturgy, and hierarchy. Thus Crowley writes in the Book of the Law 49, quote, "Abrogate are all rituals, all ordeals, all words, and signs," unquote, in perfect Joachimite fashion.
The Pelagian controversy, ladies and gentlemen, I would maintain, actually began with Job and his friends. For over 30 chapters, Job and his friends debate these great questions that have so occupied the minds of men. Why does God allow the suffering that he allows? What is God's role in evil in the world? Why is the world, if God is good and God loves us, why does he allow the world to become so corrupt as it is? These are questions that dominate the minds of men. And in chapter 38 of the book of Job, Job is confronted with God. God steps into the conversation. And to the great chagrin of Western philosophers, he doesn't give them any explanations. Western men love explanations because that's how they sell textbooks and college degrees. But when you look in chapter 38 to the end of the book of Job, God lays out a number of points. Number one, he puts Job to the test regarding the nature of creation. Do you know how the sun works? Do you know how the firmament and the oceans hold together? And he takes him through a number of cosmological questions, which to this day, Western philosophers have no answer for. And Job doesn't have an answer. So God is like, all right. So God takes him to a number of creatures. He takes him to the behemoth, who moves his tail like a cedar tree. And you look in the context, the whole context of the chapter is the power and magnitude of God. And so he's going to compare his power and magnitude to creatures that he has created, which is why he would say that this behemoth moves his tail like a cedar tree, to denote his might. Okay?
this idea that the tail is like an elephant's tail that can get stiff. It's absolute cope. He was talking about some kind of brontosaurus or something. And then he takes Job to the Leviathan, the great fire-breathing dragon, which he describes it in great detail. That he was talking about fire-breathing. These creatures existed among men in the ancient world, and as I've documented, up until the scientific revolution, zoology textbooks had whole chapters on dragons. It was standard operating education all the way up into the 1700s in the West. And God asks him a question. He says, you can't stand up to these creatures, and yet you dare to stand up against me? And that's the end of the conversation. That's the end. You got these men asking all that. We want answers. We want answers and explanations, and God gives them zero explanations. And his response was, "I'm smarter than you. I'm more powerful than you, and so you don't deserve any answers. I can do what I want with my own creation." And it's the doctrine of might makes right. There's no one above God to hold him responsible. That was the entire conclusion to the book of Job. So there's no universal upper world above God to hold him account that he's accountable to. And men don't like what they read in the book of Job. What they heard God say, they didn't like it. And they did not like a God that didn't have to play by a standard set of rules, which is what Plato gives them later on. And to this day, Plato's system dominates every aspect of the American mind. Not just the American mind, the Western mind, the European, British, American. Plato's system is the essential system that every Western person operates off of. Whether it be science, theology, doesn't matter. That's what, and I've documented that all in my books. So that was the beginning of Pelagianism. Was Plato's system. But this fellow right here, the actual Pelagius, he steps on the scene in the early church, and his system is condemned as heresy by Augustine. And the Catholic Church traditionally adopts Augustine's system until the time of the Council of Trent. And in the Council of Trent, which was dominated by the Jesuits, if you know anything about the Council of Trent, you've studied it. It's absolutely dominated by Archbishop Reggio and all these Jesuit priests. And they bring the Catholic Church back to a middle ground between Pelagius and Augustine, what Calvinists would call semi-Pelagianism. Okay? And this semi-Pelagian system was injected into England by this man right here. His name was William Laud. You see, by the late 1500s, early 1600s, the nation of England was predominantly Calvinists. Okay, Thomas Cranmer was leading bishop. He was Calvinist, and this guy here, William Laud, he's an English high-ranking bishop, but he still has loyalties to the papacy. And so he gets into a private correspondence with a Jesuit priest in Lyon named Otho Zilius. And they conspire to inject the controversy of Pelagius, the Pelagius versus Augustine controversy, one of the greatest controversies in the history of the church, back into England in order to divide England up and bring it back under the Church of Rome. Okay? And that all came out in the trials of William Laud and Charles I, and I have in this book all the guys who were there in the trials where this came out. A letter was found in the possession of Mr. Laud where he was consulting with this Jesuit priest in Lyon, and that's what they were doing. And they injected this controversy back into England. the results of this work is the Wesleyan movement, the work of John Wesley. John Wesley was a semi-Pelagian. He did not go all the way to Pelagius' system and say that man is born neutral. What Wesley's system said was, we accept the nominal identity of original sin, but we don't believe what the Calvinists say. The Calvinists believe that man is born totally depraved, whereas we believe that man is born kind of sick. Okay? And because of that, because man's not totally depraved, he is able to perfect himself. Post-redemption, of course, he would say post-redemption, you need Christ, but he gives you the ability to perfect yourself, which is exactly the opposite of what everything Paul teaches in Romans chapter 7, but anyway. Him and Adam Clarke and these Wesleyan theologians, they create what's called the doctrine of perfectionism. And this doctrine is perfected by these two men. Charles Finney. I remember I had to learn all about Charles Finney when I was in seminary, when I was a Presbyterian seminary student down in South Carolina. And Charles Finney is the leading voice for abolition in the North, and he is a staunch defender of the Pelagian system, the semi-Pelagian theology. He is cohorts and associates with this gentleman right here named John Humphrey Noyes. And between these two men, you have the creation of what's called the Oneida community up in New York, O-N-E-I-D-A. The Oneida community, the theology was based on the doctrine of perfection, Wesley's doctrine. Okay? And basically what this doctrine, they perfected this system. And let me back up a little bit. So at the time we're dealing here, you have a number of Jesuit theologians who are behind the rise of all the semi-Pelagianism and Pelagianism in Europe. Number one is a guy named Dominicio Lopez. He was a Jesuit priest. He was behind the creation of the Socinian movement. The Socinians were Pelagians. They were open theists, the whole nine yards, Baptists. And then you have these other Jesuit priests named Francisco Ribera and Manuel Lacunza. They basically create the worldview of what is now the Baptist religion. The 7-year tribulation, the rapture, which dominates American foreign policy. The Jesuit theologian behind these guys was a man named Luis de Alcazar. And basically he came up with a doctrine called the doctrine of preterism, which basically says that the book of Revelation was all fulfilled by the time of 70 AD. And these guys here, John Humphrey Noyes and Charles Finney, they weave in Wesley's perfectionism into this preterist eschatology. And they say, okay, we're going with Wesley's doctrine of perfection, and the best eschatology to back that up is the preterist system. So by 70 AD, we've entered into the age of perfection. Okay? This is continued by Joachim in the Middle Ages, and then these guys put the capstone on it. And basically the idea was all prophecy, everything, all the law and the prophets were fulfilled by 70 AD. And so after 70 AD, you have an age of perfection. And because we're in this age of perfection, we no longer need disciplinary institutions. We no longer need government. We no longer need judges. We no longer need slavery. We no longer need patriarchy. We do not need disciplinary institutions anymore, because Mr. Wesley has taught us the doctrine of perfection. We are not enslaved by this total depravity that the Calvinists talk about. Okay, so we are born with the ability to perfection. Okay, in an age of perfection. And this has come as a consequence of the fulfillment of all the law and the prophets. All the Sabbaths have been fulfilled, all the Levitical Sabbaths. Even, if you look at the book of Leviticus and the theology that blossoms in the Old Testament from these feasts, the Harvest Feast and the Feast of Trumpets, whatnot, Feast of Tabernacles, these were shadows of the second coming, the judgment, the resurrection, the consummation of the age. These guys say, yeah, that happened in 70 AD. Okay? The amount of deep state fed funding that has gone into this worldview is incalculable. I have to deal with this myself in my own server with men. There are close followers of mine who believe a lot of this stuff. Yeah, this is extremely powerful, what these guys came up with in the 19th century. And this theology is the inspiring force behind all the political stuff in America. The Oneida community in New York City. Okay, study it. Of course, Abraham Lincoln himself being a Baptist. Okay, this woman right here, Frances Willard, she is the one who puts the Women's Christian Temperance Union on the map. Before the time of this lady here, you had these women that Rachel Wilson likes to talk about, the occult feminists and stuff like that. That was not the mainstream feminism. This woman's feminism was the mainstream feminism. Her name was Frances Willard. She was, of course, a Wesleyan Christian, a close disciple of this man right here. Okay, she puts the Women's Christian Temperance Union on the map. She led the largest women's suffragist movement in this country, to the seething ass hurt of the Christians, especially the ones who follow the pish and rubbish of Rachel Wilson, who I refuted in detail already. Okay, so all these big players in our country, they're all come from this root right here. All of it. And you look today, you go to the Pew Research Center, look at the religious affiliation of Congress. Who are the leading demographics? Catholics, Methodists, Baptists. There you go. This system of theology that I'm going to talk about in this book, this informs everything in American politics. Everything. Okay? Now, she thought these guys were degenerate, moral degenerates. Okay? She would hold a more conservative view of feminism. She didn't believe that women should be hoeing it out and thoughting it up. But she was the one who popularized the infantilization of men and the need for these Wesleyan Christian perfectionist women to be leaders in America. Now, more directly coming out of the Oneida community, you have Victoria Woodhull. She is a member of the Oneida community of these men right here. Okay, her work is for complete sexual revolution. This woman was a complete sexual savage and degenerate, Virginia Woodhull. Okay, her work is funded by the Vanderbilt family, and this is American. The American model was these three people right here created the American model of sexuality in the Oneida community, because all disciplinary institutions have been abolished. No more need of Bibles. No more need of marriage. No more need of the family. No more need of the nation state, slavery, patriarchy. All that needed to go. Because of that, marriage was outlawed in the Oneida community, and so it was a free sexual model. Okay, so it was plurality of lovers. Okay, this woman right here becomes a close associate, confidant, and member of the Oneida community. Her name was Ida Craddock. She is an enormous influence on a guy we're about to mention. A fellow everyone should be familiar with. She develops all these techniques, scientific techniques for men to be able to have sex without ejaculating, a form of like apotheosis through the sexual control, but also indulgence, and it's these sex rituals, sex magic, sex science. She perfects this stuff in the Oneida community. And of course, who's going to learn from her? The beast of the 20th century. Fellas, are you ready? Also raised in the Baptist church, Mr. Aleister Crowley. He is a close student of Ida Craddock. Okay. Again, this man's influence cannot be overstated in the 20th century. What he did, the influence that he had on culture in America, with the hippie music, the Led Zeppelin, and the Doors, and all. I mean, these guys, they worshipped Aleister Crowley. Okay, Jimmy Page was a close student of Aleister Crowley, and I don't think I need to embellish long on him. Again, You see the development, the root, the system of theology, and how it's grown. I'm giving you direct, step-by-step causality, how we've gotten to where we're at. Okay? Aleister Crowley has a close student and confidant by the name of Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger becomes close associates and confidants with a man who is most directly most directly to blame for the sexual degeneracy in this country, Mr. Alfred Kinsey. Again, fellas, are you ready for your ass hurt? Raised in the Methodist Church. Let me say that again, fellas. Raised in the Methodist Church. You look, all these people, the leading figures that have destroyed this country. Catholic, Methodist, Baptist. That's, if you want to know, and look, no small hats here, fellas. No small hats. All of this, white Gentile Christians of the Pelagian cloth. Yes. Mr. Kinsey, of course, if you know anything about American politics, you know this is the most influential man of the 20th century. No one comes close to what he did. And he is a direct outgrowth of all this. And he's a student, friend, associate, confidant of Kenneth Anger, who is a direct disciple of Aleister Crowley. Okay? Mr. Kinsey publishes his Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, and these books become law in America with the sexual revolution. And this is what we're living in. This is it, folks. This is the complete story of why we're living in the hell that we're living in. The direct, step-by-step causal chain of how we've gotten to where we are right now. It was a religious controversy that blossomed in the 19th century. Obviously, it's an ancient controversy, but it blossoms in the 19th century, and all these people here are students of Jesuit priests. All of them. And of course, the Jesuits are brilliant at hiding themselves. Okay? And again, who are the major players here? Dominicio Lopez, Francisco Ribera, Manuel Lacunza, Luis de Alcazar. Okay? All right, and the Pelagian controversy is why we're living in the hell that we're living in.
This Gentile man, Alfred Kinsey, and his publications, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male and Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, are the foundation of our modern sexual deviancy. This is official American history to the great chagrin of the 1488ers. Mr. Kinsey's work was canonized in the United States Model Penal Code in its sexual provisions. Now, the viewer may be confused at this point and wonder whether I'm saying that traditional Catholicism is in control of the New World Order, or whether Mr. Crowley and Mr. Kinsey's occult mysteries are in control. The difficult thing to understand here is that Mr. Crowley's occult is a derivation of Catholic theology. You see, the Christian church from its beginning, in the ecumenical councils and its early patristic fathers, made a concerted effort to synchronize the Bible with Greek philosophy. This is not a conspiracy theory. This was made official in what is called Logos theology. Basically, the idea behind Logos theology is that the Greek philosophers were inspired by Logos. They were preparing the Gentile people to receive the Messiah. They were breaking the Gentile people away from the pagan idols into metaphysical philosophy, you see. And this is exactly the thing that Socrates was killed for. He was killed, why? Why was he made to drink that hemlock? He was made to drink that hemlock because he was drawing the Greek people away from the gods into his metaphysics. So the Greek philosophers were preparing the Gentile people to receive the Messiah, just as the Hebrew prophets were preparing the Jews to receive the Messiah. That was a fundamental doctrine of early Christian theology. E. Michael Jones wrote a lengthy tome on this matter in his book Logos Rising. I read this book in 2023 and provided a full refutation of it in my essays against Western metaphysics. Thus, according to official Christian theology, the Greek philosophers were literally inspired by God and were in a substantial sense prophets of the Gentile people. This philosophical technique is known as perennialism. Perennialism cannot be overemphasized in our modern milieu of thought. The division we see here between traditional Catholicism and Crowley's occult power structure is simply a dispute as to what degree Christians should arrogate the pagan philosophers. The Knights Templar, who are the patriarchs of Crowley's power structure, went farther than the Catholic Church could stand in their perennialism and began worshiping a deity called Baphomet, which is a transgender, goat-headed deity with both male and female sexual organs. The Knights Templar were just being consistent with Christian perennialism, and thus with the contributions of Catholic monks Joachim of Fiore and Meister Eckhart and their developments in Freemasonry, this gave birth to the modern occult, which is still fundamentally a Christian worldview. To further understand this apparent contradiction between traditional Catholicism and the modern occult via Crowley, you must understand the occult doctrine of the left and right-hand paths, which is depicted in the Baphomet idol. The left and right-hand paths are based on the exact same metaphysics and perennial theology, with only arbitrary differences of taste and personality. Thus, the modern New World Order, with both of its factions, is still one Logos cartel, with Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin and his Logos or Omega Point transhumanist theology as its final prophet. Thus, there is no division between traditional Catholicism and Crowley's occult, as much as mainstream Catholic apologetics would have you believe differently. They are the same fundamental ideology, but they are simply the dialectic of the left and right-hand paths of the same Baphomet body. Crowley and company at the left hand, traditional Catholicism at the right hand.
You should have believed. You chose the wrong side.
Side? You of all people should know. There are no sides, Reverend Mother.
Mostly because most people will still sell their souls for money, which is very unfortunate. That's what we're seeing in the world today, is so many people have sold their souls. So how many doctors, how many nurses didn't say anything during the whole COVID pandemic and vaccine genocide because they just wanted to keep getting those dollars, which were all being given to them through mostly the Jews/Zionists. Pfizer's run by Albert Bourla. He's a Zionist Jew. They almost all of them were in the COVID operation, which was an operation actually to depopulate the earth, which is another thing they want to do. Their essential end game is to depopulate quite a bit, keep enough people to work for them as slaves, and impoverish the rest and make everyone else sick and profit from it.
The leading figure of the modern COVID hoax was a man named Anthony Fauci. It is mainstream news that Fauci is an Italian Catholic, educated by the Jesuits in high school at Regis High School in New York, and again at the College of Holy Cross in Massachusetts. And we have already considered the foundations of Western vaccine campaigns among the Jesuits in South America. Deborah Birx, the White House coronavirus response coordinator under Trump at the beginning of this hoax pandemic, is seen here being sworn into her office at the left hand of a Jesuit priest. At the beginning of the coronavirus hoax, the director of the CDC was Robert Ray Redfield, Jesuit trained at Georgetown University. After his work was in place, he was replaced by two Jewish women, Rochelle Walensky and Mandy Cohen. Absolutely disgusting deflection and manipulation. At the beginning of the lockdown here in America, the Jesuits paraded their control of this event and the fulfillments of their prophet Joachim, proclaiming in the publication, America the Jesuit Review, quote, "We're all monks now," unquote. Moreover, the man Peter cites here, Stefan Bancel, admits in an interview he also serves the Jesuit order.
When we first started this interview, you said that you had a good remembrance of your years in France and at the Jesuits. Could you elaborate a little bit on this? Tell us, because You were at the Jesuits in Provence, in Marseille, first in your high school years, and then you moved to Versailles with Ginette for your prep school years. How would you rate the impact it has had on your life and your way to be the fantastic entrepreneur that you are now?
Thanks for the kind words. The impact that being with Jesuit has had has been very profound. I mean, I actually started even before high school in middle school. So when I was 12 years old is when I entered the Jesuit in 6e. And the piece that has been remarkable for me is, how the Jesuits live their faith, which is in action, is in doing, is in serving. Some of them live their faith, through prayer and through introspection. What I've always really admired and really resonated with me and my personality is serving in action. And I saw it every day, at École Provence, even at Ginette. But at Provence, I remember, the Father Jesuits, were always engaged with the community, with people with problems, with people that were poor. And they will literally, get in the car and go and do work and help. And that's this action, of serving has literally, had a big impact on me. Sometimes people ask me, when the virus appeared in December 2019, did you spend a lot of time thinking about doing a vaccine or not? And I told them, no, I didn't spend even 1 minute thinking about it. I knew our technology should be able to work. This virus that was appearing in China was going to hurt people. And so we started chasing and running after it. And this mindset of serving is really, really key to who I am, and I really owe it to Jesuits.
I have made this documentary for two reasons. Number one, the other documentaries similar to my position are from Baptists, such as Eric Phelps, Chris Pinto, and Chick Publications, who refuse to admit their Baptist religion is central to the Jesuit Counter-Reformation, the media psyop, and U.S. foreign policy. Number two, I believe this anti-Jewish psyop is designed to end the lives of many American men in foreign and domestic faux wars. The Catholic Church has mastered this psyop for many centuries. They did this in Spain during the Inquisition, in France, the Dreyfus Affair, and in Germany during the Third Reich. It was all sold as Catholic nationalism or Christian nationalism, which is exactly what is happening today with Trump's coming Project 2025. Trump's new regime is set to do exactly what Hitler did. Hitler improved the morals and the finances of the German people to gain their loyalty in order that he might more effectively lead them to their deaths. I believe Trump is doing this exact same thing, and he will offer the infectious aroma of American revival and the return of national pride and patriotism, all so that his controllers may lead our people to their deaths. And he may not know that he's doing this, but it is the intended outcome of his elite controllers. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a sharp and sinister plot, and it will not easily be overcome. This is the Southern Israelite signing off. May God be with us all.